All right, we want to welcome everyone to the Monday, December 11th, 2017 Board of Education meeting for the Cedar Rapids Community School District. With that, I'll call the meeting to order. Is there someone who would like to read the approval of the agenda?
That the agenda of Monday, December 11th, 2017 Board of Education meeting be approved as set forth, and that each item is considered ready for discussion and/or action.
Is there a second?
Second.
And this is a roll call vote.
Director Borcherding?
Aye.
Director Jansen?
Aye.
Director Anhalt?
Aye.
Director Humbles?
Aye.
Director Jacobo?
Aye.
Director Meisterling?
Aye.
President Laverty?
Aye. Next, we'll move into the superintendent's report. Before we do that, though, I do want the public to know that the agenda tonight does have these reports, and then we'll take communications from the audience tonight, and then we'll move into our regular meeting, including consent agenda and other items. So just so you know that if you did turn in a green form, once we're done with superintendent comments and board reports, that is when we'll move into communications from the audience.
Thank you, President Laverty, an opportunity to share lots of good news this evening. So last month, one of our community partners made special deliveries to several of our schools. Mercy Medical Center donated several automatic external defibrillators, or AEDs, to schools across the district. The portable devices check heart rhythm and treat sudden cardiac arrest. While we hope we would never have to use one of these devices in our schools, we're certainly appreciative of this donation and recognize that in the case of an emergency, these devices could save someone's life. Mercy is just one of over 100 community partners who I had the opportunity to thank at the State of the District last Friday. Thank you to Mercy and all the organizations and businesses who support the important work we do in our schools and for our students, staff, and community. And if you weren't able to make the State of the District, that is available on our website, and you could take a look at that and see what we learned about on Friday. The Lux String Quartet stopped by Johnson STEAM Academy recently during their tour of Eastern Iowa. The musicians from Minneapolis are visiting schools in the area to both entertain and teach students more about string instruments. The group performed some Danish folk music and then worked with young violinists. And finally this evening, several of our staff members have been recognized as outstanding educators since our last board meeting. We'll start with Rebecca Seeley, first grade teacher at Hoover. Ms. Seeley was recently recognized as the A+ for Education Teacher of the Month by KCRG. Next, Franklin Middle School's Valerie Shanley has been awarded the 2017 Philip Saman Excellence in Teaching Award by the Northeast Iowa Bandmasters Association. This award is presented to those individuals who meet the criteria of excellence, dedication, and commitment to the value of instrumental music education in our schools. And Julie Kane at Washington High School snagged a top national honor. The American Association of Teachers of Japanese recognized Kane's work earlier this year by naming her the National Japanese Teacher of the Year and giving her the K-12 Teacher Award. Principal John Klein says of Julie that she's committed to being a lifelong learner, constantly seeks ways to improve teaching and learning in the classroom, and is always willing to collaborate with other teachers. We know that our district has some of the most dedicated and qualified teachers in the nation, and certainly in the state, but these reminders are heartening, and these teachers certainly deserve to be rewarded for their dedication. Congratulations to all three of these outstanding educators.
That's awesome.
Okay.
All right. At this time, are there any board reports? Gary?
John, I just wanted the board to be aware that next Friday, area superintendents and board members will be meeting at Grandwood AEA along with local legislators to talk about the forthcoming legislative session. Things that I plan on bringing up, and Dr. Buck, between the two of us, would be obviously the SAVE extension and how important it is. Senate File 455, which was passed by the Senate last year, calls for equity and transportation within the funding formula, and of course we need to again remind legislators that we still do not have a viable Iowa assessment, and we need that assessment, and obviously we need the funding to be able to do that assessment. So if any of the board members have any other things that you think are important, just drop me an email, and I'll see that it gets brought up.
Great, Gary, we appreciate that. I know that some of the groups are starting to caucus here in the next week, so very timely. Any other board reports or comments? All right, seeing none, we will move into the communications, delegations, and petitions for the board. And many of you are new in the audience tonight, and we appreciate you being here, part of this public meeting tonight. Because many of you are new, I just do want to explain a little bit about the comments process here in this public meeting, as well as many of you we know are here to speak about the facilities plan. So we'll do that, these comments now. We'll go into some of our regular business. Towards the end of the meeting, you will actually have a chance to hear publicly all of the recommendations that the Facilities Master Planning Committee will make to the board. We will have questions potentially during that time. And then at the very end of the meeting, we will actually be going into a closed session separate out of here for another purpose. So this is really a great time to have those questions. I will let you know that also on January 8th, and I think this has been public, that January 8th, the board will have a work session. So there will be more time for public comment during the January 8th meeting here in the same building, the same room. And then the board will actually go into a work session in this area to dig deeper into the facilities plan that's presented tonight. That will give you, as the public, another chance to ask questions of us, and you're welcome to stay in the room as we have our work session and discuss questions of the administration and committee members as well. So that will be happening. So with that, public comments, I'm just going to read this so that everyone is clear on how this will work. And this comes from board policy as well as the School Boards Association. So the next item on the agenda is public comments. This time is set aside for the board to hear comments about items of interest or concern from the public. When I read your name, please approach the podium right there in the middle front and begin by stating your name, your address, and the organization or group you are representing if you are representing an organization. You'll have up to 5 minutes for your comments. We are not going to limit the number of people who will present tonight, although you had to have turned in one of the green request forms to present to the board tonight prior to the meeting started. So anyone who had done that, we will get you your 5 minutes tonight. Laurel Day, the board secretary, who's sitting right over here, will start the timer. Thank you. We'll start the timer. And Laurel, are we doing the monitor tonight?
Yes, it's right here.
Right here. So right in the front, you'll see the monitor as you're speaking, so you'll see when your 5 minutes are up. Comments from the public are not limited to items or topics on tonight's agenda, but they are limited to matters within the board's authority. Please understand, however, that we as a board cannot discuss items not already on the agenda. Iowa's Sunshine Law prohibits us from having a discussion without the proper notice to all of the school district community that the issue would be discussed at tonight's board meeting. Because of this, we will not be able to engage in a dialogue with you at this time, but we can and will, however, refer matters to the superintendent for follow-up as appropriate, and we individually as board members also may follow up with individuals based on your questions tonight or comments. Also, please remember that you are making comments in a public meeting. This is being recorded. It will be broadcast and on the website. Should you make comments that the subject or individual of the comments considers to be inflammatory or libelous, you as an individual may be subject to legal action brought by the subject of your comments. Thank you for your support of the Cedar Rapids Community School District. And with that, we'll move into the first green sheets here. And at the top is Daryl Spivey. Mr. Spivey, if... Can I defer till the back? You can, yes, absolutely. All right. Kelly Bolt, B-U-L-T, if you'd like to approach the podium. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Hi, welcome, Kelly.
Hi. I actually don't have anything prepared because I'm just going to speak from my heart. My name is Kelly Bolt. I live at 440 Memorial Drive Southeast. I have 2 children in the Cedar Rapids Community School District. I have a 6th grader at McKinley and a 3rd grader at Grantwood. I am also the PTA president at Grantwood Elementary. I've been involved in a lot of activities there, and I know the Vernon Heights neighborhood very well. I urge you to really think about the neighborhoods when you're making your decision on this plan. They are very ingrained, not only in Grantwood, but in probably 8 other neighborhoods in this city. So please, when you're making your decision and that vote, that you take that into serious consideration. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Next, Danielle Wigg, W-I-G-G. Hi, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Danielle Wigg. I live at 1618 13th Avenue Southeast. That is in Grant Woods District, but I have a kindergartner at Kenwood Leadership Academy. I am also the PTA treasurer of Kenwood Leadership Academy. I overall just have some questions, like, just to reiterate, has this plan really been thought through? How is this going to affect us in the coming years? Not just us with kids in the school district now, how is it going to affect our city? I know that there have been some cities that have tried things like this and it ended up falling through for them. One of them is Omaha, and I highly recommend looking into what happened in Omaha to their school district after putting a plan like this through. My other, questions are, before any decision is made, have you fully considered the plots that these new schools are going to be built on? And why are we building or picking new places to build when we have these schools that already have foundations that you can build or renovate the schools instead? They've got shells, foundations. You're going to have to do new power, new sewage, all of that. Going into 21st century learning, and that's what we're trying to achieve through this master facilities plan, that should be more focused on our educators and not the building they're in. Because I can tell you that I'm choosing to send my child to one of the older schools in the city for the amazing education he's receiving there. My last thing overall is I actually talked to my 6-year-old today about how Kenwood has been chosen as one of the schools to be closed, and he started crying and said, Kenwood is where I go to learn how to become a leader. It's where he just got bumped into first grade reading level because they have the time and they have the smaller amount of students to be able to focus and see those gifts in these children, that he is not at the kindergarten reading level, and decided to move him into a first grade classroom for that. If you put these kids in these bigger schools, and I grew up in a huge school district. I grew up in Virginia Beach, Virginia, where we had no time. They had no time to focus on those little things about each individual student. And so none of that was recognized in me. I went to overcrowded schools. We had over 800 kids, more than our school could handle in that capacity. And that school district is growing rather than closing schools down. They're adding more schools because they want people to come in. And I just see problems with this plan, not inviting people into Cedar Rapids and growing it, and rather just pushing people out and wanting to move elsewhere. I can also tell you personally that my family would move out of Cedar Rapids if this plan goes through. We would go to another school district, go private, or even homeschool for that matter. It is very important. And like I said, my 6-year-old cried when he heard that today, finding out that his 3-year-old sister and his 3-month-old brother would never get the experience that he's had at KLA. So thank you so much. Thank you for everything you do. And I really, really hope we think this plan through and make sure it's going to benefit all of us and our community. Thank you.
Thank you for your insights. We appreciate that. Next, we have Kathy Ulrich.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kathy Ulrich. I live at 1436th Street Southeast here in Cedar Rapids, and I represent only myself. In looking at the plan and going to several of the beginning meetings, one of the things that strikes me of the suggested schools that were closed that I think perhaps might be closed that we should reconsider. I would suggest that it might make more sense to leave Kenwood Leadership Academy open and to close Wright School instead. The reason I say that is because Wright School is very close to Pierce Elementary. And I think that given the structure of that area, and I used to live there many years ago when I taught at Kennedy, I think that could be done and maybe be a more viable solution. That would be one thing that I might suggest for consideration in the plan. The second one would be, I think it might be best if we consider leaving Garfield open and closing Arthur instead. I am a proud Arthur kindergarten graduate, and I grew up in that neighborhood and spent a great deal of time over in those fields by the Arthur Annex. And what I would tell you is, as a Mount Mercy graduate driving through that neighborhood quite frequently over the years, that is a very busy street that cuts through that campus. And as the years have gone by, I used to walk B Avenue every day to get to school. And what I can tell you is there's a lot more cars, a lot more people driving their kids to school. And I think it might be a better consideration if we looked at that, because that's not a street that Cedar Rapids is probably ever going to consider closing like they did many years ago at the Coe College campus when A Avenue used to go right through in front of the library. So I would make that suggestion also because Garfield is more self-contained. As I said, there's no street going through there, and I think we could do a lot of good things with Arthur if we decide to make it more of a neighborhood hub like we've done with Polk the past few years. So I would respectfully make those suggestions for your consideration as we look at this plan and move on into January. I'd like to say I think we're very fortunate that we have the superintendent that we have, and that the people that have ended up serving on this board have spent a lot of hours and a lot of time and careful consideration. It's never easy to do these kinds of things. So I have the utmost respect for the people who have been involved in this process up to this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. We appreciate those. And next, Corey Chestnut. Hi, welcome, Mr. Chestnut.
Hi, John. Good evening. My name is Corey Chestnut. I live at 2107 Greenwood Drive, Southeast. I want to start by thanking all of you for serving our school board and serving the better good of Cedar Rapids. I do serve with the Save Our Cedar Rapids Neighborhoods group as an administrator. I come to you as a parent in a neighborhood of a closing school, but also as a concerned citizen for our core neighborhoods. My concerns in the plan, and I will try and get as much information out as possible when you apply the school board's, and all this information is to you. I emailed it. There's a lot of information, just like we received a lot of information, so I'll try and hit the high points. What I saw in the plan is that the schools don't fit the neighborhoods. From I-380 east and south of Williams Boulevard, there are 910 compared to the 2016 enrollment that will not have a seat at your new schools. That is a serious problem, and that is not something I think is good for the city. When I approached this issue, it was said that 18 elementary schools is not affordable. When I dug into the information, it's 18 elementary schools at 50% larger per student is not affordable. So I provided you with a plan. I hope that you consider that plan. It's currently showing 23% larger than our current schools, which is a huge opportunity for an architect to provide better learning environments. It is 1.8 million operating budget savings. The 600 school that is stated, when you apply your desired class size, is actually 568, which leaves us short basically one school to the 7,800 goal that the group was tasked with. I would like to know where that school is going. I would like to know how that school is being paid for. And once that and busing is applied to the operating budget, it is a $1.8 million operating budget. So my plan rebuilds 15 schools, remodels the same 15, fits the neighborhoods they fit in, and provides the same operating budget. I strongly encourage every school board member to review that, ask me any question. I love it proved wrong. I'd also love to see it proved right. And I think that we can come together and do something great for our city. This is a unique opportunity to put together a great plan. I don't believe that mine is right. I don't believe that yours is right, but I think that working together, we can come up with something great for Cedar Rapids.
Thank you, Mr. Chestnut. And really, both of your plans, we've asked the administration to review those to help us better understand the details. And I know the administration will be back in touch with you about your latest plan. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have Nick Duffy. Mr. Duffy. Hi, welcome.
Good evening. Thank you. Nick Duffy. I'm the principal at Jackson Elementary, 1338th Street Northwest. I also live here in Cedar Rapids, too. I want to echo the comments that have been made. I appreciate the time, the energy, and the crucial conversations that have surrounded this process from both board members and folks on the Facilities Master Plan. I recognize the challenges that surround the decision and a plan of this magnitude. And I also recognize that when we talk about schools, it becomes a pretty emotional issue. Everybody here is, whether they're on the side supporting the Facilities Master Plan or making recommendations, whatever side of the issue they're on, I believe everybody wants to do what's best for kids. I support the plan, the Facilities Master Plan, as an educator and a parent and a community member who is concerned about the future of our city. And the future of our school district. One of the first questions that I know is asked to realtors is, how are the schools? And we have got many things to be proud of in our district. We've got many things to celebrate as a school system. But I also know that folks moving into the Jackson area, if they come and take a tour, they see a really architecturally interesting building that isn't perhaps the most aesthetically pleasing from the outside or the inside. When Jackson was originally built, it was built without walls in 1970 on the inside, separating classrooms. It might not surprise you to find that a few years later walls were added because, well, you get kids inside and it gets pretty noisy. Even with walls between the classrooms, all of our classrooms empty into common areas. Upstairs is the library, downstairs it's the cafeteria. Noise is an issue in our building because we have a joyful building of learners, and learning should be a noisy, joyful thing. In addition to that, Jackson in particular has an issue with accessibility. When you walk in the front doors, it's a split foyer entry. There is no elevator. There are no ramps to our building to provide handicap accessibility, and so that is a concern as well. So I know that the process used here is in some ways similar to the process used in the 1970s and 80s as the district was faced with declining enrollment at a time when Adams Elementary and Hayes and Lincoln schools were closed, and we know that was an emotional issue at that time as well. But I want us to keep in mind what we are tasked with, which is educating kids. And the importance of doing that in a space that is enjoyable, architecturally inviting, and also comfortable for the learners and the adults. We know the only way we have peace in our world is through education. The only way we have an informed society is through education. The only way to a better life for our kids is through education. And our kids deserve the best possible facilities they can to learn in. So I thank you for the work that you do and the tasks that you have ahead of you, and look forward to working with you for many more years.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your comments. Next, we have Keith Hammer. Mr. Hammer. Hi, welcome.
Hi, Keith Hammer, 515 Forest Drive, and I'm here representing myself. First, let me start off by saying thanks to each of you. the board members for what you do, putting yourself in positions where you must make difficult decisions. It's not a position many could fill, and it's certainly not for those without thick skin. And it's for that exact reason of making difficult decisions that I come to you today asking you, when the time is right, make a difficult decision for the benefit of the entire Cedar Rapids community and not support the master facilities plan to be presented to you later for the reasons that I'll now explain. On the face of it, this plan represents tough business decisions that the district believes is necessary to deliver our city's youth the best education possible. It's a very sensible and fiscally appealing plan for solving the ailments of the district's aged physical infrastructure. But unlike an independent business, the decisions this plan implements affect not only the district and its students, family, and staff, but also our entire community. All of its residents, whether they are parents of school-aged children, childless couples, singles, retirees, city employees, or even big and small businesses. I stand before you today myself, a parent with a senior in high school and no potential elementary children ever impacted. But still, this decision matters to me and others. This plan will permanently reshape our city and core neighborhoods in ways that we believe go against the very vision of our community as it works to grow and revitalize many of our core neighborhoods. As the city tries to redevelop the downtown in Nubo and works to make itself more walkable, this plan strips walkable neighborhood schools from the very heart of 8 neighborhoods. In addition, the creation of 600-plus student elementaries where neighborhood schools once stood stand to diminish the primary reason many of those parents moved to Cedar Rapids for its local neighborhood-based educational experiences. Therefore, I ask you to consider, where was real stakeholder input for this plan? The input of the business community in these impacted areas, the city of Cedar Rapids, the neighborhood associations of these 21 neighborhoods. Opportunities like this occur less frequently than once in a generation. Shouldn't such a lasting and monumental undertaking for this community, costing nearly $250 million when it's all done, demand bringing all the brightest minds together from these groups to work in a tight partnership? I believe the district would argue that they have attempted this with their committees, but I think the Gazette article on Saturday, December 9th, highlighted quite well that the, quote, public participation input was limited and sporadic at best. Compounding this was meetings heavily cited towards district personnel participation, what one could argue resulted in a position of an unintended conflict of interest, given the nature of the topic. The core of the community members had no true voice in the process to develop the plan and shape the initial product. Let's be frank, the meetings in October and November, labeled public input discussions, did not help in the core development of this plan, as admitted to by Dr. Buck in the Gazette Friday when it was stated his response that the plan has not significantly changed since it was presented to the public last month. So with that, let me take a step back from the plan. Ultimately, the core of this issue is much larger than this one approach to solving it. The core of this issue is about what kind of city do we, Cedar Rapids, want to be. In meetings with others, it's been clear that the majority of people involved have moved into and remain in Cedar Rapids neighborhood almost solely, for the neighborhoods themselves, including the presence of a walkable neighborhood school. It's what brought my family here 7 years ago, over Linn-Mar and Community College, and it's what's kept us here. In relation to that, we're not losing approximately 900 kids a year due to other districts due to the lack of new buildings in our district. We all know we have core neighborhood and school issues throughout the city that drive this flight and threaten Cedar Rapids that we need to work together to resolve. But by removing the schools from these neighborhoods, you unintentionally and adversely impact this effort. Ask most residents of Mountain View for their feedback on the after effects of removing Polk, their neighborhood, from their neighborhood. It's usually not pretty and it's readily apparent. You don't need to go to Kansas City or Linn-Mar or College Community. Just look in our own backyard for the results. No one in this room will argue that something doesn't need to be done. Our district and its leadership should be commended for acting. But the construction of a plan must be driven more by our community and how it sees its destiny. Ultimately, we may even find a community that backs a bigger, bolder vision, including public funding by way of a bond. But you will never know that without all the right stakeholders involved. In closing, I say this. I believe that this current plan will ultimately result in 2 simple and unintended things. First, the flight of residents capable of making the move away from these neighborhoods, one demonstrated back there, as we lose walkable schools. And secondly, the further decline in the remaining schools as more residents choose to join others as their neighborhoods undoubtedly change. Please ask the district to take a step back and broaden its outreach and rethink, reimagine, and re-envision this plan for the betterment of our entire community. Thanks for your consideration, allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Hammer. We appreciate your comments. All right. Next, we have Alma Happel. Alma? Hello, welcome.
My name is Alma Hoppel, and I live at 2920 Westwood Drive, Northwest. I just want to urge you, even though I know this is a really difficult decision because it affects many, many people, the whole city, I just hope that you will listen equally as much to the people of Cedar Rapids who are directly involved and affected as you do to paid consultants. Listen to the people who are really here and know a little bit about schooling too, even though they're not maybe as highly educated or equally up to making the big decisions like that. $224 million and all the changes that are involved it's really a big decision, and I really wonder about the wisdom of doing this without any kind of a public referendum. Yes, we do vote on school board members, but many times we don't know what your policies are. We just read a little brief summary in the newspaper about what you think and what you would like to see happen. We don't really know what who we're voting for many times. We don't know you personally. And I would also ask that, I know when they presented this plan, they said that a lot of people open enroll to Linn-Mar and Prairie because their buildings are new and beautiful. I question about comparing the scores, the outcomes, the academic outcomes of students in Linn-Mar and Prairie to Cedar Rapids. It's sometimes a very different population that you're dealing with. It might affect the scores from that point of view. I think that's about it, except that I really do hope you will think hard before you make a decision that can affect a lot of people for a long time. Thank you for all the time you put in. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. We appreciate them. And next we have Chris Kronbaugh. Chris? Hi, welcome.
Hi, good evening. My name's Chris Crombaugh. I live at 427 26th Street Southeast. I'm part of the group Save CR Heritage and Save Our CR Neighborhoods, but tonight I'm speaking for myself and my immediate neighbors. I came before you a couple of months ago and expressed my concerns about broadening the way that the facilities plan project was being explored. And I've also spent some time and visited with Superintendent Buck, and I attended the listening session at Washington. Along with some of the others that spoke tonight, I'm again here to ask you to slow down and to consider the impact on this plan using a much broader palette. There are many here to speak tonight, and I'll kind of leave it at that. But this is a plan that affects the whole community, and as someone who lives in one of the core neighborhoods that will be affected, I really am concerned about the impact it'll have on our immediate neighborhood, but also the other neighborhoods in the city. So thank you for your time, thank you for your energy, thanks for your work, much appreciated. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kronbaugh. We appreciate your comments. Mr. Todd Lund. Todd? Hello, welcome.
Thanks. I'm Todd Lund, 520 Lime Rock Drive, Northwest. I guess the first thing I want to say is this plan really isn't a plan. It's more just to get the money flowing so you can really come up with a plan. And I guess let's first define what the real problem we're trying to solve is. Is it improving the education Is it trying to fix the funding issue, or is it just trying to get more enrollment so you get more funding? It seems like the SAVE fund is based on students, how many are enrolled. So the more students you get enrolled, the more SAVE money you get. And now, so for instance, from what I saw from the board or from the superintendent, it said that we'd get $950 per student. So if you lose 1,500 students, that comes up to over $1.4 million. So now let's get to the issue of maintenance. Does improving just the elementary schools really improve the need for more money? Have you really looked at middle schools and high schools? I think this plan actually says that there's going to have to be a bond to repair middle schools and high schools. So it doesn't really seem to fix that problem. And since we're talking about the SAVE money, let's define what kind of money we're talking about. Based on the estimates given to me, from 2007 to 2030, it says that the SAVE fund will have $378 million. And if you extend that for another 20 years, that's going to be probably another $300 million. So you're talking about over $678 million just for the SAVE fund. And then the PEPL, that got up to $9 million a year. So that's another $90 million just for the 10 years it got approved for. So if you add the PEPL, I think you can approve it at like a 33-cent rate without approval. If you add all that money up from 2007 to 2049, you're probably talking close to $800 million or even more. And most of that's on school improvements. So if you start looking at what we've done so far with the SAVE money, it seems like everything's gone into the high schools. I think $90 million has gone into improve high schools. And based on a study I saw from 2011, it said that it would only take $31.6 million to bring them up to satisfactory level. So maybe things have changed since then, but it seems like you spent an extra $60 million on the high schools, and what happened to the elementary schools? They probably have gotten worse and worse since then. And then the bond, I'm also worried about bonds. This building cost $22 million from the SAVE fund, just for the building itself. But a $30 million bond was taken out, and I believe $55 million was repaid on that bond. So if you add the $25 million plus the 22, you could actually say this cost us like over $40 million just from the SAVE fund. Is the same thing going to happen for the bond? You're going to have to take out a $240 million bond and repay that? What kind of interest are you looking at? How much of the SAVE money are we wasting in paying back the bonds? And now just a little bit about the 600 class size. I know there was a number that you'd only have 560 kids per each class, but if you start having a benchmark of 21 kids in kindergarten, unless you get people to transfer in, every grade is going to be 21 kids unless you have a lot of transfers in, because once you start with 21 kids in kindergarten, unless you get transfers in, you're going to keep 21 through every grade level. And that really reduces the capacity to 504 kids without transfer-ins. So now you're looking at only having capacity for 6,498 kids, when I think the current enrollment says 7,312 kids. So you're now 804 kids short, unless you get a bunch of kids transferring in. And if you look at Viola Gibson, they have a capacity of 700, functional capacity of 700, but they can only fit 547 kids. So they actually need to get bigger, and their capacity is 700. So what are these new schools going to look like? They're going to fit 600 kids, but are they going to actually have functional capacity of 750, 800? They're going to be huge, huge schools.
Excuse me, Mr. Lund, your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your comments. And Steve, I don't know, you may want to follow up on some of those figures. I'd be curious. Next, we have Tanya Johnson.
Hi, Tanya Johnson, 3816 Riverside Drive, Northeast, and I am the president of the Cedar Rapids Education Association and speaking to that tonight. Last year, we started building partnerships with community groups in hopes that our teachers and paras unions could work at building a stronger educational community. Over the summer, we met a union that had built a relationship with its community on the basis of a narrative that they worked on together. We, the Cedar Rapids Education Association leadership, decided that we needed our own narrative that would make clear who we are, what our beliefs are, and what our purpose is. We decided to share our narrative tonight, and it seems fitting as our district looks ahead at a facilities plan that also works towards moving our community forward. I have given each school board member a copy of our CREA CROTA narrative so you can follow along.
My name is Ann DiGiacomo. I'm honored to be an ELL teacher at the elementary level and a member of the Cedar Rapids Education Association. We believe in the power and potential of all of our students. The diversity of our students and schools enriches the community as a whole. Our students are diverse individuals with unique talents, needs, and aspirations. A quality education does not look the same for everyone. We're preparing students who will enter a constantly changing world. We believe that public education gives students the tools to be empathetic, culturally competent, lifelong learners who will change the world. Our role as educators is to advocate for our students while opening unlimited possibilities for them.
My name is Kelly McMahon. I'm a teacher at Hoover Elementary School. We are part of the Cedar Rapids community. Successful schools are engaged with and supported by their community. This can only be accomplished by fostering a strong relationship between parents, educators, businesses, policymakers, and community organizations. Working together with our community in collaboration enables us to address social injustice and other barriers to learning. When students, educators, parents, and school administrators are all aligned and pulling together in the same direction, there is nothing that can prevent extraordinary success in our community.
Chris Rawlis, U.S. History teacher, Jefferson High School. We are committed to working collectively to be a force for democracy and social justice. Public education is the cornerstone of democracy, and we share a responsibility to create equitable educational environments to promote larger social justice in our community. We believe all students will be successful in school and in life when they are given the proper academic and social supports. To that end, we will fight for all students to have access to the educational and social resources they need. We will work to break down the barriers that have created racial, gender, and socioeconomic disparities in our schools and community.
Good evening. I'm Molly Donahue, and I've worked in the district proudly for 27 years, and I'm a proud member of CREA. We believe in the promise of public education. High quality and fully funded public schools are essential to the communities that they serve. Public education empowers students to be informed citizens, critical thinkers, and future-ready adults. Schools are places where students are exposed to different and challenging viewpoints and ideas. Students are able to build new meaning, debate ideas, and shape the world around them through high-quality education.
Hello, I'm Bree Oxley. I teach social studies and science at the middle school level. And to finish our narrative off, we believe education is an art and a craft requiring talented and diverse professionals. Education is one of the most complex undertakings in our society. Educators must be knowledgeable, skilled professionals committed to the success of every student in our community. We believe that a collectively negotiated master contract is essential to promote the profession and support growth. We expect professional development that is relevant to our students' needs and our professional growth. Educators form long-lasting relationships with all students, and it is essential to support educators so they are empowered to inspire students and change their lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tanya and Ann and Kelly and Chris and Molly and Bree. We appreciate your comments on behalf of the teachers in the district. Next, I would like to call Ashley Baird. Ashley? Hello, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Ashley Baird. I live at 1953 Beaver Avenue Southeast. I'm here to speak about the master facilities plan. And I mean, this plan to close schools, we know it's going to change neighborhoods, and pretty much everything I have written down here has already been said tonight. My son is a kindergartner at Grant Wood, and I'm worried about what this is going to do to the makeup of our neighborhood. When you lose a neighborhood school, it does change things. You know, you no longer have that kind of hub for the community. Personally, if I was moving into the area after a school had just closed, that would not be my choice. You know, I would not personally be moving somewhere that's declining, because that's how it looks. Again, like I said, pretty much everything I have written down here has already been said tonight, so I would just really ask you to think about this, you know, and listen. Don't just hear us, listen to the concerns of the people who will be greatly affected by this. And thank you also for all the work I know that has gone into this. I know there's been a lot of research, but I really do think that this can definitely be improved upon. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your input. Next, Jane Harney. Jane? Hello, welcome.
Hi, I'm Jane Harney. I live at 552 Forest Drive Southeast, and I'm representing myself. My husband and I relocated back to eastern Iowa 17 years ago after spending nearly 10 years living in Minneapolis. After exploring all areas of Cedar Rapids, we quickly chose the southeast side because of its older established neighborhoods, its neighborhood school, and its proximity to downtown. We have 2 daughters at Wash High School this year, one of which will be graduating this year. I have concerns about the district's broad brush approach to the decision to close 8 elementary buildings. Speaking of our neighborhood elementary, Grant Wood is a really well-supported, well-connected school. It consistently ranks at the top of the district's list for total school volunteer hours, year after year. I think this is just one example of where the district has not educated itself on the strengths and the weaknesses of each elementary. Instead, it seems like they are looking purely at the bottom line. This plan will have a detrimental long-term impact on the vitality of our neighborhoods. 17 years in Vernon Heights, we've witnessed a continued increase in the number of young families moving into our neighborhood. And we believe this trend will be reversed, and our neighborhood and the city at large will suffer terribly if our neighborhood schools are closed. In terms of walkability, my husband and I, as kids, both walked to and from school each day. We remember those walks feeling pretty long, especially on cold winter days. A couple nights ago, we Google mapped the routes that we walked from our childhood homes to our elementary and middle schools, and no walk exceeded a mile. So I guess when you're a little person with little legs, the journey seems a lot longer. Closing 8 neighborhood elementary schools will sentence many more children to daily walks that approach 1.5 to 2 miles. On the flip side, if parents have the option to drive their kids to school, a school nearly 2 miles away, I also fear that a lot of parents will make that choice. And school kids will lose the experience of walking to and from school because those reasonable school walking options have disappeared. And for those parents that don't have the option of driving their kids, I fear for the safety and well-being of those kids as they're forced to walk the proposed distances without decent routes to arrive at their destination. So in conclusion, you have a tremendous amount of power with this decision. The proposed plan, as everyone has said, will dramatically impact this city as a whole. It's not just a decision impacting school buildings. Please encourage the district to engage the community in the development of this plan so we can find the right plan for Cedar Rapids. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We appreciate your comments. Next is Candace Lynch. Candy?
Good evening, everyone. I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to share my thoughts about the master facilities work planning and the recommendations that are being made. My name is Candace Lynch. I'm the principal at Johnson STEAM Academy, and I also live at 1920 Fifth Avenue Southeast, so have been a lifelong Cedar Rapids resident. I want to, first of all, take a minute to formally recognize the commitment of the volunteers, both on the board and on the committee, who've been invested in this particular work since September of 2016. The amount of research, time, creativity, and communication that have been involved in pulling together these recommendations can likely not be fully calculated. I've appreciated the opportunity to share my own ideas and learn about the process and next steps both last April and again this fall at the community input sessions. I've been an educator for almost 30 years and have worked in many different facilities. My children are all adults, and some of the proposed work will likely take place after my career has ended, so I may not be personally affected by new facilities. However, I do strongly believe our children deserve the best that we can provide, and our community needs to be forward-thinking as we hope families will be both attracted to our community and that as young adults start to make life decisions about where they will raise their families, they'll want to stay. As I mentioned, I've worked in many of the facilities in our district, and during my time, I've watched children have rainwater from a leaky ceiling dripping into their lunches. I've seen children and teachers who are wearing their winter coats during the school day due to difficulty regulating heat in a particular classroom. I've seen staircases and railings that are dangerous but were up to code at the time the building was built. I've seen children on crutches or in wheelchairs who can't access second floor as staff tries to figure out how can we help them have equal access to all the learning opportunities due to a lack of handicap accessibility. I've seen children trying to attend to learning who are so hot that sweat's dripping onto their work due to cooling units not working properly. I've seen teachers frantically moving classrooms items out of the way when they're supposed to be teaching because condensation's dripping from air conditioning units that aren't working properly. And I've seen some of the best custodial and maintenance staff around repeatedly frustrated as it's difficult to keep up with the demands of some of these older buildings. I personally have struggled with a small building budget and trying to make decisions that will be frugal yet still allow children to learn. And I've also struggled with the demands of the 21st century and buildings that aren't set up to support modern learning environments. I've worried most recently about student and staff safety up and just until this last year when we practiced lockdown drills and couldn't get cellular service in our building. That's been rectified since, so I appreciate that. But to me, all of these things point to a need to be forward-thinking and make some really hard decisions about what next for our kids and for our schools. I recently heard an analogy about change and how very difficult it is. The analogy was really comparing change to learning to go across the monkey bars. And when you think about it, you first learn to cross the monkey bars, you just hang there with both hands on one bar. And then you might go one bar at a time, but in order to get across the monkey bars efficiently and effectively, eventually you've got to let go of the bar behind you with one hand while reaching for the next bar. I really want to thank the committee and our board for being willing to let go of what's behind us and start to make really hard decisions about what's in front of us all while keeping an eye on what's best for kids. After attending the sessions, reading the reports, asking questions, and getting well thought out answers, I trust that those on the committee and our school board will do their homework and are making recommendations that are financially sound, well-researched, and focused on student learning. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Candace. We appreciate your comments. Next is Tanya I'm going to get this wrong, but probably Schneiderman? Schneiderman? Very sorry.
Okay.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Tanya Schneiderman. I live at 2017 Glenway Drive Southeast. I have 4 children in the Cedar Rapids schools, 4 that graduated from Grant Wood Elementary. Currently, I have 2 at McKinley, 1 at Wash, and then 1 who has graduated. The Master Facilities Plan presented before the board has far-reaching implications for the future. Decisions made now will impact children, neighborhoods, and the community for generations to come. Let's make sure we are making the most thoughtful and informed decisions possible. Make sure that the plan before you is what is best, not just for the current budget, but for the city of Cedar Rapids. Please press pause. Do not vote next month on this plan and allow for more community involvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. We appreciate your comments. Next, we have Adam Christie. Adam? Hello, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Adam Christie, 1953 Beaver Avenue Southeast. I'm here for myself, but also as a member of Save Our CR Neighborhoods. I just want to thank you, just as everyone else has, for your time in looking at this plan and seriously considering the recommendations not only from the master plan authors, but also the community at large. I also want to thank you for getting my wife and I involved in our neighborhood. Once we saw this plan come out, it got us talking and it became a buzz in our neighborhood. And that is because we live in a very strong core neighborhood, with Grant Wood being on the chopping block. My son Harrison is a 6-year-old at the elementary school, and my daughter Helen, 3, will soon be there as well. So this is a very personal issue for some of us, and by looking at this room tonight, the community wants to be involved. I understand we have to reach out to the group that helped put this plan together, but this is a tough decision to make, and there needs to be much more community involvement. So I will say, please help us preserve, thank you, our core neighborhoods. Keep them walkable, keep them bikeable, keep it a place where kids want to grow up and parents want to raise their children. Because if we have to send them to a big box school 1.5 miles away, while we might hit some wellness, blue zone, good things there by having skinny kids with strong legs, they're going to be nobody in these large big box schools. So let's slow down. We have just gotten this plan. You are just receiving this plan, but it's been in the works for years. Give us the time to give the input, tell you what we think as constituents of yours in the Cedar Rapids Community School District, and let's work together. That's all I ask. Let's slow down, let's think of the core neighborhoods, and let's think of the progress Cedar Rapids has made since the 2008 floods, because this is detrimental to that progress. So thank you again. Thank you to everyone that came out here today to show your involvement, and let's work on this together. That's all I ask. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. All right, next is Shauna Carolyn. Well, that's right?
Carolyn.
Okay, I'm sorry. Shauna.
Right, we get it all the time.
Welcome.
Shauna Carlin, 1100 18th. I saw the news over the weekend with parents complaining about not having enough input despite the multitude of surveys and meetings to gather that input. I have seen petitions and social media posts designed to incite by using selective or wrong information. I filled out that survey, and one of my comments was that I wanted people on this board who would make the tough decisions for the benefit of the kids. And in my mind, I had closing schools. I came to the September board meeting, which was much less attended than this one. A gentleman made a presentation on the plan, and I was so thoroughly impressed about how well thought out it was and how it addressed the concerns that came up repeatedly during my son's tenure in elementary school. It exceeded my expectations, and I was and am excited for this community. So I just want to reiterate what the main advantages are and respond to some of the objections I have seen. First, There will be more sections in these schools. This will stabilize the class size, despite what I have seen posted that it should lessen the chance that the kids will get lost in the shuffle. This was always an issue for us. The fewest number of students in my son's classes was 28, and this did not include integration and part-time homeschoolers. The class ahead of him hovered at 30. I saw parents move out of the district for this reason. I saw them open enroll and homeschool, and there were always more who enrolled to fill those spots, so the class sizes never really dropped. With only 2 sections, adding a third would bring the class size to 20 or fewer. As a parent, I would think that was wonderful, but doing this all over the district probably wasn't financially viable. Starting out with more sections gives the school more wiggle room for those last-minute enrollments. Having more sections will also bring more knowledge and different experiences by having more teachers at the table. Students learn differently, teachers teach differently. This would increase the chance your child could be matched to who they would learn best with. There would be dedicated specialist teachers, so you wouldn't have to plan events around when they're there. I went to a show choir event on Saturday, and that included elementary schools. These music teachers probably have multiple schools, but only brought one with them. So are their entire schools missing out on the opportunities because the teachers can't be in 2 places at once? Volunteer hours have declined year after year. While Grant Woods is off the charts, it too has declined. Wouldn't it be better to consolidate our efforts? Most of our school's best volunteers did not live in the school's neighborhood. So if you're there to help the kids, why would that stop? The fact that these will be community buildings, by enabling them to be sectioned off so that they can be used for after-hours activities, will have a positive impact on our neighborhoods. These schools are not ADA compliant, energy efficient, nor are they optimal for technological upgrades. In fewer than 10 years from now, these schools will no longer be financially viable. Don't our kids, our community as a whole, deserve better? I have seen other plans that would have more elementary schools, but would that solve the class size problem facing some of the schools in this district? Would that give us dedicated specialist teachers? The claim that has been made that people would leave the district, I think the evidence shows that most likely the net difference would be in the opposite direction. We already have a net loss of 900 students who take their public funding with them. People have listed the reason for leaving as outdated schools. The Catholic high schools combined into a newly built Xavier 20 years ago, and enrollment increased. Biola does not allow open enrollment for a reason. Like it or not, many people like new and all the advantages it will offer. I like to see that the board is being proactive. I like that they have put a lot of effort into solving the biggest problems facing this district and not just replacing building for building. I like that they are making the hard decisions. You will never make everyone happy, but there are many people who support this plan. But from what I have seen, those will not be the loudest. But I implore you to stay the course. To me, a school's community is the people, not the building. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your comments. And last, we have Daryl Spivey. Mr. Spivey. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Daryl Spivey, 555 Augusta Drive, Southeast. I had the opportunity to be on the planning committee that's referred to here. Many of the school board members here recall me several years ago when I fought hardly to stop Polk School from being closed. So I understand the emotions and the heartfelt situation people feel in when school closings are discussed. One of the things that made it more difficult then was there was no grand plan. So trying to represent a school that we thought was a model of education, and it was difficult to see why it was closed because there was no plan before us to compare it with. There's now a plan. I've been a member of that committee, and I can assure you, and my comments really from now on are more to the audience than to you. The issues you've talked about, the committee, I think, would agree. There needs to be more discussion, okay? And I'm confident that will happen. The neighborhood issue hit the front pages of the committee the first meeting, and it was there every meeting to the last meeting. It's a big deal. Most of us on that committee grew up in neighborhood schools and know the importance of them. We're in a situation, this is my personal feeling, we're in a situation right now where the federal government is negligent about supporting education. They have a lot of happy talk and minimal support. State of Iowa has a lot of happy talk and decreasing support toward the local school community. The board is sitting here with that dilemma in their hands. Money's a big deal. Urgency's a big deal in that the committee looked at two things very hard. First, we felt we asked the hard questions, and we asked piercing questions. And when we came together, we were not a homogeneous group by any means. There was a lot of emotion and a lot of suspicion that we worked on the entire time. Not only did we ask the hard questions, we focused on the data to the best of our ability. And oftentimes the data told us things contrary to our emotions. And that was a difficult thing to face. But data's data. And sometimes that's where the decision should land. I encourage the people in the community to continue trusting the school board will listen, demand they listen, but see, at the same time, please step back, look at the plan, see how you can add to it, see what we can do. Cedar Rapids is in a turning point. We either move forward or we lose a bunch. And that loss is one of those losses that probably can't be recovered from fully. Decisions have to be made sooner rather than later. Timing is an issue on how these decisions are made relative to funding. And somehow we've got to find a way for the community to get behind this. And I agree with those who said the community has to be behind it. So let's continue seeking a way for that to happen. And finally, I'd like to express my confidence in Brad Buck. We now have a young person who is not retiring after this session on the school board, who is committed to coming to Cedar Rapids and listening. And I heard some of the most eloquent comments out of Brad that I heard in the room at all. And that was clear down to the very last day. I was one of those that challenged all along about why are people leaving Cedar Rapids? And what can we do about it? And what are you doing about it? And Brad's commented on the last day some very insightful views about why we're where we are in the loss of students. It all comes together, but I encourage you to work with the school board, and I'm confident, as I fought them long and hard, I'm confident in their hearts they're more intent on listening and working with you than they are going to war. So let's make this a Cedar Rapids plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spivey. We appreciate your comments. With that, that ends the public comment portion of our meeting tonight, and we'll move into our consent agenda. With that, are there any items on the consent agenda that the board would like to pull for further discussion or question? Seeing none, would someone on the board like to move for approval of the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. And this is a roll call.
Director Jansen.
Aye.
Director Anhalt.
Aye.
Director Humbles.
Aye.
Director Jacobo.
Aye.
Director Meisterling.
Aye.
Director Borcherding.
Aye.
President Laverty.
Aye. Thank you. Next, we'll move into board governance, which is the request for a closed session, which will happen not now, but once the meeting is adjourned. Would somebody like to read a motion for approval of a closed session?
I move that the Board of Education hold a closed session on Monday, December 11th, 2017, to evaluate the professional competency of an individual whose appointment, hiring, performance, or discharge is being considered when necessary to prevent needless and irreparable injury to those individuals' reputation, and the individual requests a closed session as provided in Section 21.51I of the Iowa Code.
Is there a second?
Second.
And this is a roll call vote as well.
Director Anhalt.
Aye.
Director Humbles.
Aye.
Director Jacobo.
Aye.
Director Meisterling.
Aye.
Director Borcherding.
Aye.
Director Jansen.
Aye.
President Laverty.
Aye. Next, we'll move into the administration section of our meeting, and first we have the comprehensive annual financial report, and we'll turn that over to you, Steve, and you have some folks here tonight to talk about that, so welcome.
Hi, I'm Sherry Lusky, a county manager with the district. Gives me great pleasure to introduce Heidi Hobkirk from RSM Auditing Firm. She will present our comprehensive annual financial report for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2017.
Hello, welcome Heidi. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me this evening. I have a brief presentation. I'm not going to go into great detail because I know you have a full agenda tonight, but to provide you some highlights from us as your auditing firm and the results that we had this year. So first, the communications to you as the board. We come in and perform an audit under several auditing standards and want to tell you the results of those. The first one is over your financial statements. You received an unmodified or clean opinion. This tells you your financial statements are materially correct and we found no errors in those, so the best opinion that you can have. We also look at your internal controls over the financial statements, and that's presented in a letter under governmental auditing standards. And happy to report that there were no deficiencies or findings as a result of that either in the current year. And last, we look at your single audit or your federal grants and awards. There we actually look at some programs in very specific detail and provide an opinion over the programs tested. There were 2 in the current year, and both of those programs received an unmodified or clean opinion also. And in addition to the clean opinion, we did not find any deficiencies or compliance findings to report either as we looked at all the requirements of the programs. So a very clean opinion, or clean audit in the current year. In addition to that, you did implement a new standard. There's always new standards that are being implemented by the district. This one was a disclosure only, and it had to do with tax abatements. Your CAFR now shows the readers how much you're abating in taxes. And you might think, well, we don't abate any taxes as a school district, and you're right. It's from the urban renewal and the TIF districts at the municipality levels, but that impacts your assessed value, so ultimately impacts your property taxes, and you are collecting a little less there. So that's now being disclosed under the new standard in the financial statements. There were no audit adjustments that we found, so the information that management provided you as unaudited is the same that you'll see in the financial statements from us. And then we had no disagreements with management. We had no significant issues that we discussed, nor any difficulties encountered during the audit. So very good audit this year. Just high level on some financial information for all of your governmental funds. You did have revenues of $239 million. That was an increase from the prior year. You can see you get it from various sources, your state sources being the largest, and that did slightly increase from the prior year. For those same funds, expenditures were about $236 million in the current year, and most of the categories were pretty consistent. Debt service slightly went up, but those were your normal principal and interest payments of the bond, so expected. This one's your enterprise fund, which includes your daycare and nutrition. Most of those are, you get federal funding, so that is shown in the non-operating revenue. The operating revenue, about $7 million, is those charges for services that you do charge. Operating expenses are covering those enterprise activities, and your change in net position was about $84,000 in the current year. I already discussed the compliance reporting, so at this time, I'd just like to thank management, all they do, all the help that they provide us, all the information that they provide through the audit process. We couldn't do it without them. So thank you to Sherry, her department, and everyone else throughout the district. And then I would open it up if you have any questions for me.
Any questions of the board about the audit? There was one question that came up, and I don't know if you can answer this or Steve, but in the tax proposal at the federal level, there were some questions. I know this is being raised at the higher education level as well. And we've refinanced some of our bonds to make sure that we get the best interest rates and have saved several $1 million, I believe, in that process. Will that become an issue moving forward if this tax plan that's been made aware at the federal level come into play? Is that something that we should be talking to our federal legislators about, or does that not affect K-12? Do you know?
Are you talking about the taxability of the municipal bonds?
Mhm,
Yeah,
mhm.
it would ultimately, because you're selling the bonds, and obviously an incentive to purchase your bonds is that they're tax exempt. So that would apply to the refunding along with any new money bonds. So it would be a topic to consider.
And I would just say, Gary, that's something that we should maybe add to. I don't know that our state legislators have that on their radar, but definitely at our federal legislative level would be a conversation that saved us quite a bit of money over the last few years. So, any other questions of the report? And Steve, remind me again, this is the 22nd year that we've had a national statewide award for fiscal management. Is that correct? So I want to congratulate you and your staff, Sherry, and all your hard work to make that happen. So thank you. And to RSM. So Heather, thank you so much for your work for us. All right, next we'll go ahead.
This is a voice vote.
Oh, this is a voice vote. Great. It is a voice vote. All right. So all of those in favor all of those in favor of accepting the comprehensive annual financial report as presented to us signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, the same. Any abstentions? The motion passes. So thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we'll move into the item that I know most of the audience is here to hear about, and that's the presentation of the Facilities Master Plan Task Force. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Buck and Steve Graham.
Yeah, so thank you, President Laverty. So tonight is an exciting time. So this process began in September of 2016, and we're bringing a recommendation or a series of recommendations to you this evening from that Facilities Master Plan. We do have a couple of guests that were members of the committee, and I think they're both going to speak tonight, Jim Craig and Maureen Oviatt. And then Rob Schwartz is also going to be doing the bulk of the presenting here this evening to give you a sense for where we are with that plan process. So with that, I believe that Jim is getting us started.
Hello, welcome, Mr. Craig.
Good evening. Pleased to be here. I live at 4801 Millbrook Court Northeast. My name is Jim Craig, for those that don't know me. I'm the father of 4 graduates out of the Cedar Rapids School District. The youngest of those graduates graduated from college in May, and I'm watching them all embark on careers. And in doing that, I volunteered for this committee because I'm recognizing just how important an education is for the life choices and the options that these young adults get when they get out of college. I'm privileged to help introduce this Master Facilities Planning Committee's recommendations tonight. I think the board may know, but I'm not sure the audience all knows how this was configured, but there were a number of community leaders in our committee. There were people from higher education that were involved. There were people from business and people from the chamber. There were people that work from nonprofits. There were parents, there were teachers, and there were school administrators involved. As Mr. Spivey said, we had a very diverse group. Most of us didn't know each other. We were asked to consider a lot of information. We also considered public comment from the open houses that we had and discussed it. We toured old and new schools. I believe we provided a survey that we considered along with all the information and studies that were presented. And we asked a lot of questions. We asked for more information. And we had vigorous discussions about neighborhoods and facility quality and security concerns. And all those issues that have come up tonight were discussed by our committee. And we often challenged each other's thinking. Sometimes we argued about conclusions or what we should do before we had votes on how best to proceed. So I say that to tell you that you can be assured that the recommendations are the result of considerable thought and considerable study and discussion by the members of this committee. And one other point I want to make before I go to the main points, but as the board and the public review this plan, I'd ask you to keep the big picture in mind. It's not easy to consolidate schools. Everybody, me too, I want my schools to stay the same. I want my neighborhood to stay the same. But as a committee, we were asked to consider what was best for the entire community. And our recommendations are intended to enhance education for all of the students in the Cedar Rapids School District, to provide education to those students more cost effectively, and to meet the educational needs of our students today. I was asked to comment a little bit on the importance of conducting this reimagining of our building environments and how they impact education. There's so many reasons I couldn't talk about them all. I've been here too long. But I want to talk about four that I found most compelling. I hope I speak for the committee. One, it's obvious our elementary schools are getting old. To over 100 years old. 17 of 21 elementary schools are more than 50 years old. They were designed for education in a different time. We're running into increasing expenses to maintain and operate them. Importantly, our schools don't meet safety or security standards today, and they're not meeting parent expectations for safety and security, and parents are choosing other schools because of that. Our children learn differently today than they did before, and because our schools are 50 years old, I went back 50 years, which happens to be the time I was in elementary school. And what did we have? We had neat rows of desks. We had a chalkboard for presentations. We had textbooks that were outdated the day they were published. And when I thought about what we plugged in overhead projector. That's all. That's all we had in our classrooms. Today, kids use iPads, laptops, smartphones, smart boards, smart TVs. They have access to the internet, instant news from around the world, Google Earth, and YouTube, and I think there's more that I don't know about. When kids see presentations today, they see it in HD. They've got digital formats. There's vivid colors, and they see still and moving images. They watch history as it happens. They have unlimited, instant, free access to information. And to be honest, our buildings weren't designed to accommodate this kind of technology. And we're not ready to accommodate tomorrow's technology either. A third reason it was important to do this study is we've learned from presentations and materials that we received that jobs and careers today have changed. Employers demand global networking, rapid communication, collaborative work, team problem solving, technological fluency, the ability to collect, organize, interpret, and apply information, and creativity and innovation is highly prized today. Workplaces are far different than when we were kids. They're less defined, they're fast-paced, and they're focused on rapid learning and the accumulation of data. We need learning environments that promote and develop the kind of skills our kids need for jobs today. We reviewed studies that show that narrow hallways and fixed, immovable classrooms inhibit learning these type of skills that are important today. We've learned that spaces with clean air, comfortable and even temperatures, and natural light improve attitudes for learning, and promote creativity. They enhance teacher recruitment and teacher retention, and they make our schools better. We also need schools that have flexible spaces that can accommodate group work and individual study, that can accommodate one-on-one teaching and large group instruction. And we need rooms and furniture that can be moved and modified for collaborative learning, for project work, for guest speakers in the classroom, for student presentations. And we need to develop learning environments that are technology rich, with areas to allow students to work with tools, to create videos, to test their robotic creations, or to develop code for a new app. And we need buildings that safely allow for both students and our community to use these assets in our community. Now, there's no question that our committee felt that historical schools with their classic architecture and years of tradition in important neighborhoods was very important. But the question to us was, can we afford to be so wedded to our old buildings that it inhibits our ability to educate today's students? And our committee decided no. Finally, the last important reason the compelling reason to consider our facilities today was the issue of money. And people don't want to talk about it, but it's unavoidable because you have to balance the budget. And what have we learned? We learned the cost to maintain these old buildings is increasing every year. We learned that the physical plant and equipment levy that is designed for maintenance and major renovations in school simply can't keep up with the needs of our buildings. We've all seen state support for education declining over the years, and we have no reason to believe that trend isn't going to continue. And at the same time, we have excess capacity in our elementary schools. We have more seats than we need. We're maintaining and repairing more buildings than we need. And we as a committee determined that the district can operate its schools more effectively in educating our students and more efficiently by consolidating some of those schools. We're at an interesting and unique point in history where the cost of renovating two underutilized schools and bring them up to minimal contemporary health and safety standards is nearly the same as consolidating and building one new school on some existing school sites which are designed to accommodate the educational needs of our students today. And by reducing the number of schools, we can redirect up to $2.8 million from general fund money that's used now to maintain and operate our buildings and apply it to teachers and equipment and materials and supplies that we can use to educate our students. Now, I'm going to introduce Rob Schwartz with RSP, who can help address specific details of the plan and explain our recommendation in more detail. But as he does that, I'd like you all to keep in mind one of our committee's guiding principles, and that was that all student learners are entitled to safe, quality, modern, and flexible facilities that maximize their learning potential. Thank you. Rob?
Thank you, Jim.
All right, thank you, Jim. It's always hard to follow someone that has a great story for what's happened in this committee, but the point of what I'll be presenting to you tonight is how we've gotten here. So if you remember, back in August 2016, the board, there's all but one of you were on the board at that time, said be bold, think big. How do we think, how do we imagine what education should look like not only 5 years from now, but 10 years and on into the future, as much as 50 years. So tonight I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the process, some of the different items that built into why the committee came to their consensus on what's being recommended to you tonight, and then a little bit about the plan. And then we'll follow up with one other committee member to give a presentation, again, some of the storyline behind why the the plan looks the way it does. So I thought I'd first address, many people are new to this process and are not familiar with RSP, and if they Googled or followed some of the articles, they probably thought we were from California. My staff says, no, we wish, but we're not. We're also not an architect firm. And I mention that because that was one of the values when you go back to August that the board had with this process. You didn't want anything designed around the intent of building buildings or doing anything that was related necessarily to that brick and mortar. The end outcome may get there, but the focus was to be on what was happening with the academics, the culture, and of course what's happening with the economics. And so the value of that was back in 2012, the architect of record for the district, Shive Hattery, did a very comprehensive study of the buildings on what was needed. And through this process, they updated those costs, updated what projects were completed to make sure that the data as we worked through the last 14 months actually was updated and made some sort of sense with the cost estimates for renovations versus building new. But before I get into all those details, this is a list of people that at some point, either through the entire process or some of the process, because again, this was 14 months, that were involved in the discussions that we had, whether it was the subcommittees, the committees, public inputs, and whatnot. So I really want to thank them, did an outstanding effort. Jim's exactly right. There were many nights where the conversations, people probably left a little bit upset, a little bit confused, and they asked for more information. And as the consultant facilitating this, we looked to the administrators when there were things that needed to be provided, particularly Steve with all the budget stuff. I mean, just amazing the things that we tried to get to the committee so they would understand some of those complexities. So really want to thank them for their patience, their willingness to ask some of the difficult questions, their willingness to dig into the guiding principles that you provide at the committee. So a little bit about the process. Remember, this tagline that we had was chosen specifically to reimagine, to re-envision, but most importantly, to reinvest in the core areas of the community. And I think the committee would say as a consensus, that's what they tried to do with the given conditions as they learned through this process. I won't read all of these bullet points here, but what I wanted you to understand with their journey, if you go back to the briefings that we gave you through this process, they had belief statements, they had an understanding of what this academics, cultures, and economics means to this process, what it means to Cedar Rapids. We looked at some things with enrollments, demographics, and development, specifically knowing what happened in 2008. How did that change how students actually now are living? And we'll show you a visual of that as I go through this presentation. We tried to look at and involve the cities in this community to know what was happening with their comprehensive plans, their capital improvement plans, what happens, for instance, in Cedar Rapids with the connectivity of some of the sidewalks, because again, that was important to the transportation of the students, whether it's walking, by bike, or by car or bus. We looked at a lot of academic research for right sizing of schools, what's the ideal school size, grade configuration, pupil to teacher ratios. We looked at a lot of things with financial data. And we also did a lot of different tours here locally, and then with 2 school districts that are a little bit farther along in their process with reimagining and reinvesting in their community with existing sites. We also had some consideration and conversation about what these community hubs, the Phase 3 implementation, might look at, considering some of the historic preservation, architecture, floodplains, and really is the right school sites being chosen for where the district would reinvest. So again, if you go back to this process, we had a total of 44 different meetings that a committee member could be involved in. If you put this in a 2.5 hour average per each of those meetings, they spent about 80 hours in meetings through the course of this 14 months. That doesn't include the countless amount of time they spent with their neighbors, friends, different groups, talking and discussing what their thoughts were through this process. If you also look at the colors that are in this process, going back to August, one of the goals the board had was to try to have different involvement at different times when there was pertinent information to be presented. So we had the board setting the stage, that's the blue. We had a darker green, which was the subcommittee, and they focused in 5 different areas to look at the financials, grade configurations, closing of schools, all the different elements to build the foundation. So when we came to the lighter lime greens, they would have the ability to understand what their fellow committee members were thinking about any of these particular areas, specifically before we got to the economics. The orange areas, which there are 9, and what I wanted to make a note of is you as a board approved extending this process. It was actually supposed to be done in September, but we extended it here to December and then on into January for the board to deliberate and talk more, investigate, hear more things from the community. So the orange areas represented the public inputs. So just a visual on this being phase 1, so you can see the subcommittee areas that we focused on were finance, program offerings, grade configuration, what we do with new schools or school renovations, and then closing and or repurposing of schools. As you can see in that phase, there were 17 meetings. We got to phase 2, which we are just now completing. You can see there's a total of 27 different meetings and the breakdown again of what we try to accomplish through that journey. That got us to phase 3. This is after the board makes their approval of whatever this plan will end up looking like. One of the things that the committee felt was very important, what they heard from these public input sessions, was that there needed to be more conversation with the communities that would end up being impacted by these very different changes from the way the communities were used to the educational programming being delivered to them. So having smaller buildings of 450 going to 600s, having fewer elementary buildings. And so they felt that there needed to be some more discussions similar to what you've seen with some of the examples of how the city of Cedar Rapids has done some of their corridor planning or neighborhood plans, where you bring some of those vested stakeholders in these areas around one of these sites that would be reinvested in, and you start to talk about some of the things that would happen with the programming in the building. You would talk about what are the elements of the building that need to be factored in, such as should there be a gym, should there be a health center, an expanded library, things that would make a greater outreach for that site to the community. So give it greater number of hours, more numbers of the days of weeks where it could actually address some of the specific community needs in the community. So some of the different information that they looked at. I know as a board you've heard this several times in our board briefs about this ACE concept. We really tried to focus the committee on the academic piece. What do these students need in the future? What do they not have in these existing buildings? How would that actually be improved if you renovated it or you actually had a reinvestment on specific sites with new buildings? We then focused a lot on the culture, because the culture is the buy-in. I think we heard from one of the committee members at the last meeting that said, data dulls, facts fade, stories sell. The culture. What are the elements that build this plan into the grassroots approach for supporting why the district needs to do some of these changes with buildings, educational programming, and so on. And then we had the cold reality that you heard from Jim about the economics. We can't ignore the fact of some of the pending economic challenges the district will be faced with over the next 5 years. So each of the meetings were structured in a way that it wasn't the consultant or the administrators dominating the conversation. It was really structured us as the facilitators to present information, present the data that's been requested, or provide insight into what that data means. And there were lots of conversations at the tables, then larger group report outs. We used clickers to help get past some of the harder questions. We used the traditional dots. We had different tours, homework after these meetings for them to continue thinking about what they've learned, very much like what you see your students in a classroom. They don't just get presented something and then walk away. There's a learning process and understanding what it is that they were being taught or what they needed to take from that particular meeting. We have these belief statements. These are categorized in these 5 areas of the most importance for each of those areas that we continually reminded the committee to look at and understand as they were talking about some of these things, whether it was going from 21 sites to 13 sites. How does that impact what the delivery might look like for the students of the future? We had a lot of conversation about sustainability, because one of the things that the committee members were very passionate about was they didn't want decisions that were made that were not going to be sustainable. So when we get 10 years, 15 years down the road, how are these modernized buildings, whether they're renovated or new, how are they going to impact future board members on decisions of economics, academic output, and so on? So this was the definition they came up with, that sustainability is our commitment to be learner-centered, future-focused, resource optimized, community enhanced, and facilities. And the facilities is, again, a broader outreach to the community than just being the traditional elementary school that only the elementary students are experiencing what could happen in that building. We had different consensus on the following statements. I won't read each of these bullets, but this just kind of gives you a sense of how the committee grew through the journey to get to the point where they're recommending what they're recommending to you tonight. We have some data with the open enrollments. And this particular chart was something that's been presented to you in your board briefs, also at the public inputs, that shows that there's a growing trend of students that are making choices that live in the district to choose other opportunities for educational programming. And this is a trend that the committee was concerned with. They asked a lot of whys of the reasons for this happening, and they range from a lot of different things that I'll touch on in a couple of slides. We also looked at the costs again that were produced from Shive Hattery, architect of record, of what the Pebble costs were for improvements to, in this case, the elementary buildings, which represented the blue part of the charts, and then the green represented the leadership thoughts back in 2012 and 13 to bring those facilities up to an academic standard that would be somewhat comparable to a new building, albeit not necessarily as good or easily programmed as a new building could be in that particular situation. So again, they can understand what the actual costs were and how would that relate in the bullet point you see here. $223 million, roughly, dollars for the existing Pebble plan, and with the plan that's being proposed to you tonight, about $224 million. Everything was baselined with this facility cost index, and we used this 50% barometer of when any of these buildings were above 50%, that called into question, is this a site that's worth investing in? So again, going back to the previous slide, you know there's between $10 and $14 million in a building to bring it up to a standard. How does that relate to, again, the facility cost index of the buildings? And so the red line became that threshold for conversation. Didn't necessarily mean if some of these buildings were at 52, 53 that they would get newer renovation, but it started that conversation. We then had some information that the district provided that really started shaping, we need to start doing something now. And this is the Pebble outlay, so the physical plant and equipment levy that the school district has. And what we were focused on was that red line. So between 23 and 24, it goes below the green line, which is the projected revenues that you have, which means that there's more need than dollars coming in. So this became kind of the conversation of, if we have more dollars going out, we have this facility need, how are we going to be able to address that by keeping 21 buildings? We also had data that was put together that got into what would the operating costs be currently? What would it be with 13 600 buildings? And what would it be if we had 18 450 buildings? So you can see the current is the blue. So we work to the right of 13 600 buildings, it's the orange, and then we get to the 18 450 buildings in the green. And what became apparent with this analysis is that there's other things that need to be factored in, and the district has commissioned a study on transportation, because when we change the transportation area around a building, there's going to be some differences. But overall, when we're looking at this information, it costs more money to operate the 18 450 buildings than it does when you go to 13 600 buildings. And I know there'll be more questions about that later. And this was the graphic to help understand that. And then Laurel, if you'll hit this, I wanted you to see some of the power of the data. As you see, this is a heat density of elementary students, and we just hit the 2008 year up here, but the red areas represent the greatest density of students. So I wanted you to understand that there's a lot of data that's behind some of the decisions the committee was looking at. And this visual, this animated movie, shows you where the elementary students have been going from 05-06 all the way to 17-18. And you can see we've had predominantly very dense clusters in specific areas, like around Johnson Elementary. We go out there on the west side as well, and you can see in 2008 it disappears, right? We had the flood, and so we had all of the families that were in those areas move out. So I want you to see some of the back-end data. We've been getting our projections for numerous years. This became a baseline of understanding. If our goal is to try to have 7,800 student capacity, anywhere between 7,600 and 7,800 student capacity for core K-5 students, this became the baseline. And so naturally they questioned things about accuracy. So we shared, well, how good has RSP been with forecasting what the enrollment is? And I think the district, the board, you received this particular report page as well. So again, is the data playing out the way experts may be saying things are happening in the community, so that you can start building your plan around the data sets? So we had some milestone moments. We presented this at the public input session, and there were really three areas. We had the ideal elementary size of 600 students, and we had the focus being on elementary schools, and then we had site reinvestments reasoning. Why were we narrowing down from 21 to 13 and getting a lot more specific about which sites would have the reinvestments and those that would be repurposed and a meaningful relationship with some other entity in the changeover of what that site looks like? So if we just briefly hit the 600 school size, you heard some of that from Jim, and I think you'll hear more from Maureen about this. This was a driving point to be able to start developing the plan you had here. I don't think anyone on the committee felt good about the fact that in this plan, you're going from 21 to 13. The reality of that is there's fewer buildings. There's going to be an impact of how people have envisioned their experiences with their kids now, grandkids, maybe their own experiences. But they saw the benefits outweighed what their current situation is. And so you'll see all of those things from the modernizing schools, the academics, the teaming, all of those type of things are built into that. The focus on the elementary schools came about because they knew there was limited dollars. When we looked at the data that was provided for what a bond referendum amount would be needed for doing all of just, let's say, the Pebble projects for elementary, middle school, and high school, over $400 million. Well, when you start putting the math to what that would mean for a bond referendum, you hope the legislature will extend SAVE so that the burden of doing the improvements, whether it is renovations or new, is not solely on the people who live in the Cedar Rapids community. Those are my words. Site reinvestment reasoning. Those got into where we looked at different things. We initially started out, well, hey, you guys know your existing boundaries, so hey, we'll draw some general 600 amoebas on the map that kind of represent what you might see over the next 5 years of the projections. That was horrible. Because everyone was focused on, well, why did this boundary go over here to here? I'm giving you a little bit of this detail so you understand that as they went through this journey, they started to understand the complexities of this plan are just beginning. Once you have the consensus of what sites are reinvested, there's going to be things of the dollars to be allocated. So what are the future dollars to make this happen? And going from 21 to 13, there's going to be a realignment of boundaries. There's going to be some opportunities when you talk about diversity with these 600 students enrollments, you'll be able to have a larger attendance area. And I think when they started looking at data, when we had a survey of how do students get to school? How do they get away or leave school? Not get away, that would be bad, right? So how do they leave school? What we found is those coming to school was about 20% walked. When they left school, about 25% walked. So we already have a majority of the families either ride the bus or are transported by car, even with the attendance areas as we see it. So as we start looking at the data, it started creating the idea that there is already some changes in how students are getting to school. Again, with this are some of the information that was gathered from the last 3 public inputs. And what we provided here was really a live discussion result of what happened at our last final committee meeting. And so you have like the busing of students, for example. The district has a study that's believed to be completed sometime in January, end of January, I think, that's going to look at what, using the current students, what would that mean if we had this 1 mile, 1.5 mile, 2 mile radius of free busing? How does that look with the transportation costs? How does that change what the operating efficiencies would be? And again, I won't go through each of these bullet points, but I wanted you to have the benefit of the committee was continually, after these public inputs, processing what they heard, whether it was from the surveys or from the actual conversations that happened at the tables or report outs that were occurring at those public inputs. And I can't say enough thanks to those community members that came to provide their input, because it really did shape the ideas and concepts of this plan. All right, here's one other map that I'll show you. One of the conversations that naturally came up was, well, what if a building is closed? My property values will decrease. So I'm going to show you one of 2 videos here, and what we thought was interesting is we used the Lynn County assessor data, and so you see 2 things on this particular animated GIF. On the bottom right, you see a bar chart with a line. The line represents what the average values were doing from one year to the next with the properties, residential properties, inside the Cedar Rapids School District. What you're seeing in the actual map, in this case around Monroe, is how those property values changed over time. What you are able to see from 2012 to 2017, the values are greater than they were in 2012, and you see that it follows what has been happening district-wide. So I want you to kind of, again, see some of the data sets that built into, again, there's a question asked, well, what is the answer? Would you potentially see this? And we showed this as well for Polk, but in response to time, I'm not going to have Laurel hit this one, but we'll have this animated GIF available, hopefully on the website. It's fairly large, but it's kind of interesting.
Could you actually play that if it's available?
Absolutely, we're going to play it right now. It's wonderful. And again, you can see that the values are a little bit less than what the district average is here around Polk. But again, it follows that same similar trend. And again, data here in your community that we're using.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so this gets us to kind of that 100,000-foot view of the plan. The big thing the committee wanted everybody to understand, this is a 15 to 20-year plan. So when we start talking about these community hub meetings, this is something that's ongoing and a awesome portion of engagement that the district is going to have with the community. We also wanted the board to know that this is being driven by that 3-pillar concept of academics, culture, and economics. A combination of all 3 of those created the plan that's being presented. They feel very strongly about the reinvestments of sites specific to the core and focusing on where the students are, where your facilities are, specifically for some issues like, let's say, with Kenwood or leadership, that program doesn't go away. If the building in this plan, as we're showing, would not be a site that's reinvested in, that program being successful would likely be in another facility. You can see the breakdown that we're showing you here is initially, is this a new building? Is it a renovation building? Or is it something that's yet to be determined? So the asterisk is that purple is yet to be determined. That we felt there needs to be more conversation with the community. It might be, is it Arthur or Garfield, but is there elements of those buildings that need to be maintained? Is it the entire facade? Is it a portion of that? Can that actually happen? Those occur in these community hub meetings. We have an estimated cost for this plan of about $224 million. Targeting goal.
Rob, is that adjusted for inflation over the years?
Good question, and I may defer that to Steve to give a official response, but that kind of dovetails into, we had 3 architect firms give us cost estimates for, let's say, the new buildings, and for a 600 building, it ranged from 16 to 20. For when we get down to these other charts, you'll see we were using 20, knowing that this takes a long time. I don't think any architect, any contract person would ever say that they guarantee that elementary school will be $20 million 15, 20 years from now. But for the most part, I think we try to factor in the escalating costs as best as you can in a 15, 20 year time period. Is that good, Steve?
I mean, if you look at past years, I think inflation is probably about 3 and 4% each year.
Yes, we have used the high end, realizing that $16 million in today's dollars would build an elementary building. We used 20, significantly higher for the continuum, realizing that initially our elementary buildings are likely to cost less than $20 million, but over a period of that 15 to 20 years, they will move upward slowly over that continuum. So we'll save money on the front end, and when we'll hit the pivot point somewhere in the middle, and then we'll see our costs go up as well. And also, on the revenue side, we have a very conservative estimate of growth in save funds that we're using of only 2%, 2% retail sales growth over the continuum. That to earmark a $212 million net debt that we could have a capacity to build in July of 2020, it's likely to be, in our experience has been, it's been exceeding that 2% mark, which would drive the $212 million higher. So I think we're in pretty good shape.
Hang on, Steve, hang on. Go ahead, Gary. I have a question, but go ahead.
Steve, how about the interest rates on bonding that we would see? Do we have a change yet in our bonding? I know we went down one grade.
That's a great question. That is a really good question. We are in a great position right now because of our fund balance and our general fund. Moody's is looking very nicely upon us. They're giving us a very nice rating. We will likely get the most competitive sale on our bond because of our considered improvements in our fund position in the school district, and we have used Tim Oswald at Piper Jaffray, who has very diligently and very carefully looked at exactly where we would fall in terms of our overall capacity to borrow money July the 1st of 2020 based upon all the metrics. So we landed $212 million, but there's an awful lot of story behind that number.
Thank you.
So a question just about the cost as well, Steve, since we're here and you're up there. So one of the things you said that it's about $16 million now, and if we look out 15, 16, whatever years, maybe 20 million. So it was suggested to me, I attended several of the forums and had a few families, had some elected officials in the area say, why do we need this to go out 15 or 20 years? Could we save money by doing this more like 8 years or 9 years or 10 years? So obviously it's less if we do them sooner, right?
Yes. There are an awful lot of moving parts. I'm sorry.
Is that an option?
Yes, it certainly would be an option. There are so many moving parts to this plan over the long term. And there's another element, too, that we need to make sure that we consider, and that is the redirection of PEPL resources towards this plan when we're looking and reviewing and thinking about what we're going to do with our investment of buildings. Should the board take action on this plan and approve this plan in January, it will it will cause us to look differently around those buildings in the future, that we may make choices regarding where safety of students is not imminently in danger at all. Staff and student safety is always absolutely paramount, but there's some choices that we will be able to make, and we'll be able to provide the board updates on what those choices could be that would allow us to redirect those precious resources toward this plan funding. So that helps.
Thank you. Go ahead, Rob. We'll keep going on this. I know we'll have lots of time at the end for more questions.
Outstanding. So some of the other things that came into this plan related to Johnson Elementary. When you look at the heat map where we have all of these students right around there, limited sites, challenges with trying to put a larger facility on that site. So the committee said a 450 building is what Johnson should be. So that's the one deviant from the 600s to having 450. We also, as we were looking at the potential of where the students are and how you have a feeder, they felt that at some point in the future, Grant Elementary would change its feeder from Jefferson to Washington. Just to be able to have the balance and knowing, again, with the meetings we've had with the city where growth was going to be, where we're seeing a lot of redevelopment, so infill, the Newbo area and other different aspects within the community. Really trying to factor that into how this potentially may look for the 3 high school feeder system. Again, this community hub discussions, that this was imperative to how this plan is implemented. I mean, right now when we talk about this building, what does this new building look like? Not many people have an understanding of what that is, unless you came from a district that had a 600 student, had the similar programming that Cedar Rapids has. It's hard to get your mind around what that building would look like. If you're used to having 300, 350 students in your schools, going to 600 is going to seem like a very large jump. But I think those that went on the tours and saw what was able to happen academically in these buildings because of these particular spaces, the conversations we had with the building principals, there became a comfort level that this 600, again, going back to the right sizing of sites in this community, 600 was where they landed. And then because of the limited funds, when we were looking at the SAVE funds, and we're using some dollars to the best of all of our estimates, that right now, if the SAVE were to be extended, it'd be about $212 million. Well, we need over $400 million. So with the focus became elementaries, you can see we need additional dollars to do the things that are already slated for Pebble for middle school and high school. This gets into what you just heard Steve talk about, how some of the dollars may get looked at differently. If this plan's approved, you have the SAVE dollars, maybe the middle school and high school programming building needs could actually be expedited. Again, that wasn't part of this plan, but just a common follow through as you looked at some of the dollars. So again, the end outcome for this is really the general fund and Pebble dollars. That was the reality that we can't continue doing the way business is being done in the district 5 years from now. And in order to be prepared for what that means 5 years from now, a decision has to start being made now. Again, the reinvestment in the core areas, all the elementaries would serve K-5. You already heard me talk a little bit about some of the specialized magnet programming that you have, that the successes of those would be integrated into future buildings. We're planning for that elementary enrollment of about 7,650 capacity. If you go back to the projections, we're showing that anywhere from 7,200 to 7,300. There's a lot of yet unknowns that may impact enrollments. That is why you continually annually monitor your enrollment projections. The future attendance areas are going to change based on some of these demographic shifts, where we're seeing kids, where you're reinvesting in your sites. Ultimately, having these modernized buildings, when we talked about the elementary sites that would be closed or repurposed, it was really based on, you already have experiences where this has happened. So how are you being a good community partner? How does that fit into the changeover of these sites from what people are used to them being? It's going to be a difficult challenge, but again, back to these community hub meetings, this is where all of this starts to take place. Ultimately, trying to provide enhanced academic opportunities for students, that they'll be college and or career successful. That's kind of something we said a lot in these committee meetings. And we know there's additional community hub meetings that will be occurring in the future. So again, here's just another visual of how that plan looks. So the grayed areas are the sites that the committee felt would be repurposed. You can see how that relates to the feeders. You can see the capacity for these buildings, what the cost estimate is to get to that 224 broken down by each of the feeders. And I thought that last bullet point was very telling throughout all of our committee meetings when we asked these questions about investments, new or renovation. We continually were getting 70% of any meeting, the committee members saying this is what they felt the direction should be. We have this tiers. I'll spend a little bit of time on this. This had a little bit of confusion from the standpoint of what these tiers were set up is each tier, if it was between a certain percentage of what the facility cost index was, made it, for instance, if it was Coolidge, has the most dollar need to bring it up to a standard, it has a facility cost index of 1 for all 21 buildings. It's in tier 1. So the idea was the buildings with the worst conditions would be the first buildings that we would look at for the new school or the renovation if it was one of the schools for renovations. And then you move down to tier 2, they're the buildings with lesser dollar needs, and then on into tier 3. The committee didn't want it to be so straightforward that just because it's in tier 1, you do all tier 1 before you get to tier 2. There may be, as you're looking at how this plan moves forward, the implementation, that you may have to dip down into tier 2 or tier 3 to make all of the adjustments work for where students go to school and not having them change multiple schools. Again, a lot of that conversation starts to come out in these community hub meetings of how we start to move this forward. So you can see the breakdown of that FCI. Tier 1 was greater than 110%. Tier 2 was between 90 and 110, and then Tier 3 was lower than 90%. Then we had the schedule. Again, this is a 15 to 20 year time periods. Probably the kryptonite in this plan is the SAVE extension. From the standpoint is we're basing it that we're going to be able to have the dollars to invest in these buildings with that extension. We know that those dollars would be available July 1st, 2020. And this gets back to what you heard, Steve. We could potentially, with those dollars, you can move this plan faster, but there's going to be some limitations. The workforce here to build the buildings, right? Whether it's renovations or new. So there's going to be some natural inhibitors to how fast you can do that just based on construction. Again, the ideal is with the tiers to try to follow through how this works itself out.
So
Question.
Rob, in these hub conversations, I'll use Kathy Ulrich's comments as an example. In the hub conversations, we have, we're closing Garfield and keeping Arthur open. So these hub conversations start in this hub group. First of all, who's facilitating? And what if the group says, nope, let's do the reverse? Is there flexibility in the plan for that to occur, or is this?
I think there's going to be flexibility,
Okay.
but it's going to be something that's driven by the board and administration on when you approve this plan, how much of the plan is for sure this is what you're going to do. We felt just through the conversations that we heard at the public inputs or what happened at the committee level, there were some things about, is it like Garfield Arthur? Is the historic preservation of one of those buildings greater than the other? How does this then relate to some of the programs? So what we were envisioning for these community hub meetings is when you start looking at, let's say around Coolidge, since it has the highest FCI, you would take an area that's around there, let's say 2 miles around that building, because that potentially could be a attendance area, right? As you start to look at where the neighborhoods are and how it filters into what this building is, and you would have different stakeholders, the building administrators, teachers, people within the city, some of the nonprofit organizations, and definitely the parents that would have some of the conversations of, it's about what could this site be? What do we need to make this a benefit to the community, a benefit to the neighborhood, a benefit to the students programming that are required over the next 10, 20, 30 years. So it's kind of something that's being designed. It's not yet set in stone of here's how that particular process would look like. We'd build on the example of what we've seen the city of Cedar Rapids with their neighborhood plans, their corridor plans. We think those have gotten a lot of good public feedback and allowed it to flex into what you're seeing happen in some of these neighborhoods. All right, so that's the timeline, a 15, 20-year time period, these community hub discussions. And then before I turn this over to Maureen, here's kind of the schedule that we have with January 11th with your board work session, and then January 22nd with the board considering what's approved. So with that, I'd like to invite Maureen up here to talk more about the committee perspective of what this has all meant in her journey.
Hello, welcome, Maureen.
Thank you. Maureen Ovett, and since everybody gave their address, 1857 2nd Avenue Southeast, Cedar Rapids, also 5953 Main Street, Troy Mills, Iowa. We can't have 13 horses in the city of Cedar Rapids. They don't like that. I'm proud to say that my children, my grandchildren attended Cedar Rapids school systems. I am a volunteer member of the audit committee in the 3rd year of a 3-year term. As you can recall from the presentation with Sherry and with Representative Heidi from RSM, that's a very dense subject. For some reason, when I retired, it was on my bucket list to learn about school finance. I don't know why, but it was there, so I figured I'd followed it, and the opportunity presented itself. But even though I'm still learning in this very dense subject, and you know how dense it is, it hasn't, even though I'm kind of intimidated by it, it hasn't prevented me from, using my habitual inability to keep my mouth shut. So I ask questions when I don't know something. I'm not afraid to argue a point. I came from an adversarial background, so I'm used to that. And I do that. And I thought, having read recently about articles in the media and comments that were made, that the Facilities Master Committee was a rubber stamp. I was thinking, well, having demonstrated my conduct for 3 years and they still asked me to be part of this committee, then, I don't think I was anybody's rubber stamp. And when I got to the committee, I found that the room was full of people like me. Well, I'm just mouthy. Those people were very talented, sophisticated, confident, articulate, and thoughtful people. You saw it in Jim, you saw it in Daryl, and there were more people like them. On the committee, there was also staff, administration, as well as teacher, building level administrators. And I have to say, I appreciated what they brought to the committee. They could answer questions for us and everything, but they were also in a very delicate position too, I thought. And the other thing is just being a committee member and how I think of things too was, I'm sorry, they were very helpful, but I also thought they had a conflict. And so I've been around that, and I knew I would have had, if they had pushed, which they never pushed, so I never felt pushed, They didn't do that. So I really commend them for that delicate role they played on the committee. I've also heard it said that the committee met behind closed doors. And it is true, as far as the statute is concerned, it was not an open meeting. But it seemed to me that if you were going to try to keep something under the radar, you would not appoint a committee of, I think we were started as 90, and we might have gone down to 70. I don't know, I didn't keep track of who was there. So if you wanted to keep it quiet, you wouldn't have, you'd have a small committee. That's what I do. But I'm a Machiavellian, so don't listen to me. But we were a large committee. And the other thing is, from the very beginning, we were encouraged to go out and talk to people in the community. Rob said that, that's true. And I did that to, I'd ask people about, where does your kid go to school? Does your child walk to school? That kind of thing. I even started asking, well, if your building closed, would you be upset? I started asking that. Plus, then I would tell people about my role on the committee. And I talked to staff, people that I knew, and tried to gather information that way as well. During this long process, we acquired a lot of documents. We started out with a notebook. I have them back there on the table that was only like an inch high. And by the time we got done, I think mine's this big, and it doesn't include my own work product. Because I used to do analysis, because I used to do research, I did my own. And so I would go and pull down what other communities are doing. Other 600, sometimes 800 student elementary schools. I also would take the information on the facilities cost index that Rob just told you about, which has been available to the public. And then I made my own charts from that. And then I pulled down the maps from the from the district, of boundary areas. And I superimposed on those where the elementary schools were and how many, what was their educational capacity. But then what was their attendance? And there's a big difference in that. And I needed to see that myself. Not that I didn't trust them, but it was how I thought. Rob also said that we were given homework. We were. And, I did most of it for them and sent it in. We toured schools, which I found very helpful. I've been in several of the district schools. But I went into some that I had not been in before. And then I was on a tour that we went to Lynn Grove School, which is a 600 capacity school. That was, for me, a pivotal point. Because until then, I was willing to entertain the idea that economy of scale, you would have better, it'd probably be more economical to have a larger school. But it wasn't until I stepped into that school and I saw the security, which was always important to me as far as the safety of our students are concerned, our staff, our visitors. We should have a safe environment for them, the security. But when you got into the school, that school had a warmth about it that was just amazing. And the way that the rooms were set up, or the areas were set up in pods with classrooms around them. We asked the administrator who took us on a tour, well, if you design this school, what did you think about as far as its additions? And they told us that school had been constructed with the idea that additions would be added if necessary. And I think that's one thing all the committee was very mindful of. If we're going to do this, if we're doing this for people in the future, then let's give them the best we can. And I think when I left that school, I said to one of the people on our tour, and Jim was on the tour with me, I said, and this is the reason we are losing kids to open enrollment. And if I may, I'd like to just say, I don't know if anybody really knows the reasons why we're losing 1,000 kids in open enrollment every year, the number has gone up. I don't think it's necessarily, I don't even know if we ever will, but I think we need to look at those numbers and try to make ourselves more attractive to other districts. But those are only some of the things we learned during the process. And it was a long process. And the other thing I wanted to mention about our group was, I don't think we could be considered a rubber stamp, because it was not a heated discussion in the room sometime. But believe it or not, had we been a rubber stamp, we would have been done with our work a lot sooner than we were. We had 9 public meetings. I went out and did at least, I did one time. I think I did one of the meetings. The other ones I did 2 apiece. I enjoyed them. I appreciated the people that came out and talked to us and gave us their input, shared with us their ideas and their criticism. I mean, this is a civil discussion, and that's what I really like about Cedar Rapids, is that there are all these opportunities for that. So we felt like we had shared with the community our work. One of the things that when I was, I asked, what do you want me to talk about tonight? And they said, talk about your journey. Well, I'm sorry, I came from a government background, and these words like journey, it didn't feel like any trip I'd ever been on. But what I finally decided was, it was like riding in the metro in Washington, if you've ever done that. You know, you stand on the platform, this long train comes in, you get in a car, maybe halfway through, but you're not sure where you are in the whole train. You know that there are always people that are going to be before you that will cross to the next station first. I think that's how I started thinking about my role in the process, or my journey, was that I knew that how many years ago, over the time that this district has been in existence, that there were people who sat just where you are, and with the best of intentions created more than 21 elementary schools, but 20 elementary schools that we are addressing today, and their cost to maintain. And I am mindful that there are people that will follow, that people I won't be around to see maybe, who will take advantage of what comes out of this decision too. And that's kind of how I thought about it. And I have to share with you too that even though we don't have kids in the school district now, when I was looking over the final list, I was thinking, oh, our goddaughter goes to Kenwood. At Taylor Elementary School, there's a kindergarten teacher who, before she started here, tutored our granddaughter with dyslexia, and who now, our granddaughter is, well, I mean, she's a pretty good reader considering her condition. She loves literature. And I know that that tutor is at Taylor. But you know, you can't be concerned about that when you're making a decision. You can't, that was how I was trained, and that's what I tried to bring to this process, was it's not about me. And maybe it's not about any of the time. It's just trying to make the best decision you can. And I know that there will be people that may disagree with me, and that's fine. I as my husband back there will tell you, I kind of like disagreements. It's what I came from. So that's fine. But I would caution everybody to remember that you can't make decisions based solely on you, because then if you want your school to stay open, will it be at an expense of another school? I think it's very wonderful that there are schools that have great volunteer things, but is that a reason to stay open? I don't know. These are big issues. You have the hard job. I enjoyed my job. I found it engaging. I found the discussion stimulating. The people that I served with were wonderful, and I don't regret a minute of the time I spent on that committee. And I thank you for the opportunity. I don't envy your next decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. We appreciate your time and commitment to the committee. So. So with that, are there any more comments? I will open it up. Yeah, what's that?
Could I just interject a point of clarification? I believe that January 11th meeting is a January 8th meeting for our open work
It
session.
is January 8th, and the January 22nd meeting, board considers plan, is a tentative date, depending on how this meeting and our January 8th work session go. So if we feel that we need additional time for consideration, that's certainly on the table, but we had to have a tentative date out there for consideration. As you know, and I think Rob has mentioned this, we've extended this plan by several months, multiple months, a couple of times already, and added more input sessions. So I think the board is certainly willing to do that if we feel that we need that. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions of Rob or the committee members or Dr. Buck or Steve, and we'll go from there, keeping in mind that we've just seen this for the first time presented like this in this detail this afternoon with all of you this evening. So we're absorbing all of this, even though many of us have had comments and multiple conversations with members of the public, with people from the city, local government areas, families. We've talked to kids in some of the buildings about these things as well, some of us. And so we're on this learning journey, I think, with all of you as well. So with that, Jennifer, you have a question?
I do. I have a question. If we could go to slide 23 and just kind of look at some of the maintenance expenses there. When we're moving from our current situation into that 600 school, I see that there are some areas like electricity that has increased in water. And I just want to clarify, is that due to increased square footage and increased amenities such as air conditioning and heating being available in hallways and in all classrooms, whereas some of our buildings do not have that at this time?
I think I can address that question. We're going to geothermal systems as the years progress, and geothermal systems are users of electricity, not natural gas. So we're seeing, as we're moving towards geothermal, the removal of boilers that consume a lot of natural gas. So you'll see the natural gas rates dropping while our electricity rates are growing, and that is because of the systems in place that we have. So that's one element of the conversation. The other is we're looking at 95,000 square foot footprint for a 600 elementary school. So we're increasing our overall square footage fairly dramatically. So that $2.8 million net savings in operating costs that we can redirect towards other important resources is really net of that increase in overall cost of nearly $300,000, largely related to energy because of a larger square footage. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Gary?
This is, I'm asking this because I think it would be helpful, at least for me, when we go into the January meeting. Could we have some more, I'm more of a visual person, and I know there's some pictures that are on the website, but could we have some models or more diagrams, pictures of what the 600 school would look like, something that I could get my hands around. And I know, and I'll say up front, I know that's not how we construct buildings, at least we haven't in the past, that we're going to take a model from someplace else and just reconstruct it here, but just to get my head around the concept of what a 21st century larger school would look like.
Well, one question related to that is, I know that the committee went and saw what we just heard was a 600-seat elementary in the Linn-Mar district, and I'm just wondering if some of the board members would be interested in actually physically seeing a 600-seat elementary. I know that Viola Gibson is close; it's in the 500 and some range. But if they wanted to go to Linn-Mar, could we work that out with the superintendent there to maybe? Sure. I don't know that we need to have a quorum to go do that, but there may be a handful of board members that would be interested in that.
Happy to do that.
Okay.
So you're saying visit it?
I'm saying that maybe if there's a handful, not a quorum, but a handful of the board members at a time that would like to go see a 600-seat Elementary just in Linmore, just up the road, to ask the superintendent in Linmore if we could go do that. Or I understand College Community also has some 600-seat elementaries. So it might be an option, just instead of looking at it in 2 dimensions, you'd actually physically get to go and see what the committee saw.
It seemed to impress some of our committee members when they saw it from the feedback and so. I'm just a visual, I'm a hands-on kind of person, and again, it gave me also the concept of how, on the 21st century, because even Viola Gibson is how many years old now?
15.
15 years, you know, so things have changed even in that time period. I have another question, I don't know.
Is there anyone else that wants to interject and then go back to Gary? Gary, go ahead.
At one time, we were involved with looking at a downtown school. We had, I think, even a working agreement with the current Montessori downtown school. Is that at all in our future plans or as we move forward?
Are you talking about the one from several years ago or the one more recently with the magnet school grant? Because my understanding is there was one from a long time ago that would be beyond the history of me.
I think it was with the Knutson
one
building.
fairly recent, we actually almost had one of the
so
buildings by the river that we were looking at.
Yeah, so what was driving that conversation is just a point of reference. We were in the running for a $12 or $15 million magnet school grant, and so as part of that magnet school grant, we had talked about opening a Montessori school in sort of tandem with the existing Montessori work that's being done downtown. But we never did receive that grant, so that kind of brought the brakes to that
was based on the
conversation.
grant.
Yeah.
I do have a question.
Nancy, can you just pull the speaker right up to your mouth
I'm
there?
pretty visual too. With our existing schools, is there a way we could get a map of the existing and then an overlay of the proposed elementary schools, the 13, where they would be positioned?
Yeah, and that's one thing,
Where the
yeah.
location, I think that would be helpful for me.
Yeah, I actually, pulled the map off of the website and highlighted the ones that were in the forums, and we had the forums that were proposed. And that is helpful to see what the committee looked at and where they're spread throughout the community. And it has raised a couple of questions that I'll bring up during our work session about, particular schools, especially in some of those core areas. And I know some of you have been listening to some of the historical preservation folks and their plans, as well as some from the Garfield neighborhood in terms of their financial plans. And we have asked Steve to look at those as well, so that we understand, are we looking at apples to apples or not? So, other questions from the board? Jennifer?
This is for Rob. I believe I remember that you had mentioned this, that the committees did look at attendance and tardiness levels when they were making considerations for buildings, correct?
Yeah, it wouldn't be the tardiness, but it would be reside versus attend. So we know where the students reside, and then there's choices on where they attend. Some of it's the magnet schools, some of it's fill in the combination babysitting, where their jobs are or whatnot. So what we focused on the maps that you've seen spread out here, this is where the students reside in proximity to those buildings.
I have a question, and this is something maybe we can get to further in our work discussion, but it was brought up tonight, and some of us have thought about this as well, I think, regarding two of the specific configurations. So Garfield specifically has been brought up as having really significant architectural value. It's some city leaders and people that are interested in economic development in the area have talked about it being sort of the next Nubo in that college district area. So Coe College and Mount Mercy, we've invested some money in terms of the facilities there in support of some of Mount Mercy's work as well. And I'm just wondering, so Garfield was not chosen and Arthur was chosen, but if the board had questions about those two in particular, they're both significant in history. Would there be one over the other, or is there some data that the committee used to maybe make that selection of saving, redoing Arthur versus Garfield?
We can go back to that particular meeting where we drilled into those details to provide that for January 8th.
I think that would be helpful. I would like that to be prepared for the next, the work session that we have coming up. And then the second thing that was mentioned, and I do have concerns about the Kenwood Leadership Academy. I've personally spent half a day one time and a number of hours other times, and have spoken with some of the parents and the staff that are there. They're extremely committed and very excited about that magnet school. And there is, it seems to me, something important about the facility and people that are in that space. And again, looking at Kenwood versus the choice of keeping Wright Elementary open, which is not a magnet school, wondering again if there are things that were discussed in the committee that might help us as a board better understand those choices. And those are only a couple of the choices, but those have come to top of mind, and I know they were mentioned tonight. So if at our work session those discussions, what the committee looked at, could be brought up as well, I would really like to understand that. And the other thing I would really like to understand is this 16-year time horizon and the financials. The reality of could it be shortened is what's the minimum that realistically this many facilities could be built, because I am looking at both sides. A lot of questions have been brought up in the political races and city council and all that about this side and this quadrant and that quadrant. For me personally, I would really like to get a couple of these facilities out there for folks to see, and it doesn't make sense for me to put them all on one side versus the other. So I'd like to, going again into our work session, have some of that understanding. And I don't know if that's Steve or if that's you from RSP providing that, but I am amazed at the information, and I was one that questioned the accuracy of all of your data, and I've gone back, I've talked to folks in some of the other districts that you've worked in over the years, and it was very helpful to understand that you're getting into that 97 to 99% accuracy on your data over the number of years that we've worked with you and some of the other communities that have worked with you throughout Iowa, not California, which is a good thing. So you've brought in superintendents from a variety of school districts across Iowa to help in your advising of this committee, which I also appreciate. And again, I don't think we can thank enough Steve and his staff on the financials. This is my 11th year on the board, and I don't want to go off tangent here too far, but not once have I seen Steve give us misleading information or incorrect information. There's a reason that for 22 years the audits come back as sound as they do, and that we aren't a school district, even with a major flood twice now, that we're not in huge debt and having the state come and take over this school district. There's a reason for that, and it's really good people behind the scenes helping us as a board and as a community keep this school district moving with very little new money coming from the state of Iowa, more and more restrictions. I mean, you can look at the restrictions, all the things coming down from the feds for public schools, and those things do add up quickly. And so finances are definitely a huge equation in this, but me personally, I just want the public to understand, I've answered every phone call, I've returned every email, I've offered to talk to people one-on-one. I haven't always agreed to be in public meetings that are set up on the side with a TV camera in my face, but I will talk to anyone, and I think most of us on the board are willing to do that. We do want this public conversation to continue, and if we're not comfortable with that, I think we will continue to do that. We are asking questions. So don't let this meeting tonight be the end of this conversation by any means. Let us know what's your thoughts, concerns, now that you've heard the actual plan. What are they? There are facts and figures here, and if something doesn't make sense, let us know. Let the administration know this isn't making sense, and we'll do our darndest, and it will help make sure that they're doing their darndest, and RSP that we've hired to get that information out to the public in a very transparent way as much as we can. So, are there other questions, Gary?
This one, I think, directed towards Steve. Are the SAVE funds from 2020 to 2027 already pegged for? Are they already spoken for? And my thinking is, could we are assured at this point that we do have those funds, that we could move forward at least with partially or tier one to get something out there in the public so people can see what these would look like.
The short answer, excuse me, the short answer to your question, Director Anhalt, is that we need an extension of the SAVE fund in order to make this plan possible from a purely funding perspective if SAVE funds are going to be the funding source. The longer answer is that we have our SAVE fund committed all the way to December the 31st of 2029, every single thing that we have with a growth rate of 1 to 2% annually on all of our commitments, all of our predicted revenues that are direct SAVE revenues and other related revenues in the SAVE fund, every nickel is included in the analysis to come up with what we have currently of a nearly $54 million unobligated reserve in the SAVE fund. But it isn't a dollar amount available today. I can't write a check for $54 million and say, this is the unobligated reserve of SAVE fund. The reality is, today at the end of this past year, it was $4 million. Next year, it's 4.5. And over a continuum of time, you see this growth rate that ends on December the 31st of 29 with $54 million. So we don't have this enormous asset to use to fund this today. We need the extension. It will make all the difference.
Other questions?
Thank you.
I do have one more question on this in terms of just thinking of the plan. So being on the board 11 years, I've been continually part of a discussion about the Highway 100 extension. I've also more recently been involved, and I think the board as a whole has, in hearing conversations about north on I-380 and the Tower Terrace proposed interchange. We have realtors that have talked to us about that land out there. I don't know, 6 years ago or so that the district, we decided, the board, that we would buy about 40 acres roughly out there just in anticipation. The land value was relatively low at the time, and we've been able to rent that land for farmland in anticipation of potential growth. There have been a lot of stories about the district is going to abandon all of the core schools, and we're just going to build a skyscraper or something out on the west side, I've heard, but that's not true at all. But what I'm wondering is that the time horizon, as RSP, as Rob, you looked at that data, we know that that land is being bought up by housing developers, by business developers. That is a huge growth area out on Highway 100 extension out there. So we know that that's planned for growth. That's a community, a city, that's not a school district decision per se. And then we're being told that all of the land up on Highway I-380 North, which is all Cedar Rapids Community School District, up along that corridor and out to the Benton County line and beyond, all of that is Cedar Rapids School District, and now they're talking about a new interchange, and a lot of that land evidently is being bought up very quickly for development, for housing and things. Have you taken those things into consideration? Because I think, enough of us were part of the discussion, as Mr. Spivey said, during the conversations about Monroe and repurposing the Polk Elementary to what it is today, that we're very sensitive, we are, about the core neighborhood discussion, about being supportive of growth within the community. And so, again, not wanting to jump to any conclusions, is that data that you've had in this process, or is that something that we're still kind of speculating on at this point?
I'll whet your appetite tonight. January 8th, you'll get more information. We absolutely have factored in the Tower Terrace interchange, the Highway 100 corridor. Our projections go out 5 years. If we were to look a little bit farther, we'd start getting into the point where the conversations you've heard from the cities, whether it's Hiawatha, Robbins, or Cedar Rapids, that you start seeing some of that growth start to happen there. In the window of our 5 years, there's limited things that start to happen. But as you know, with infill developments and whatnot, when we report out each year, they change based on who owns the property, what the economic driving factors are to say, I'm going to invest. So that's just whetting your appetite, but we'll give you some more.
And the other thing that's been brought up again in the core neighborhood discussions is there's been a lot of new sort of housing development in areas like New Bow and the downtown district on the near west side. And, just as a citizen who drives through those areas quite often, it looks to me like they're condos and apartments, and I'm just wondering, do we have information from the county or city that tells us, are those folks that have young children, are they singles, are they retirees, kind of that mix? I'm assuming that was also part of your discussions in the data that you have.
It is, but it's not as granular. Like if you call up an apartment complex and say, hey, what's the breakdown? Do they have school-age children or whatnot? They can't divulge that type of information. So as the projects are built, some of the things that we ask are they going to be 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom units? How many are those particular types? Because that's going to ultimately determine potentially the number of kids you can have. But the market rates drive another thing. The other thing that you've heard over the years, we talk a lot about the millennials. Usually I kind of make fun a little bit of them. But a lot of it is what they can afford is driving where they live. What they want for amenities is also a factor in what they do. We're still waiting to see what some of those trends may relate to what Gen X or the baby boomers did for their choices of moving to more of the single-family homes.
Any other questions from the board?
Yeah,
Raphael?
a lot of information, Rob. A lot of stuff here to look through, and that's good. Being well informed for any decision that we make, is going to be key. And as someone that I've had kids make their way through Cedar Rapids schools, I spent a total of 11 years in elementary schools, including Garfield, Wright, Arthur, so 3 of those schools that are specifically named. A couple of things that maybe would be either for our work session or even as time goes on, should something occur with this plan, maybe more for the community hubs. Do we know, or maybe was it considered as part of the process, if there would be anything related to infrastructure that would be needed? I know we talked about the safety of students and staff being paramount. Between all those 3 schools, as time went on, you see traffic issues, you see vehicles coming and going. Was any of that considered, or is that something maybe for the work session, or would it come later as part of some partnership or collaboration with the city to kind of look at those things that would be needed?
It's kind of all of the above. There was conversations that happens at the committee level. There'll be more conversation that happens at the community hubs. And we heard multiple committee members that kept saying, is there a way we can have a partnership with the city or the recreation department or another nonprofit to make some of these things go? So I think the sky is the limit. This just kind of sets the framework, and then how some of these discussions, once people become aware of what this could mean, may get into some of those things that you're talking about.
Okay. I have one sort of last financial question, Steve. So was the sale of any of the properties factored into your budget process? So as we look at the $224 million and the revenues from SAVE potentially, did you add anything in?
Honestly, no. I think a conservative budget practice is to estimate high on expenses and estimate low on revenues. And if there's a surprise, the surprise is typically a good surprise. We don't want bad surprises. We don't want to make promises that we can't keep. And frankly, when we look at the history of what we've sold property for in the last 5 years, there's not a material impact of the sale of any one of our properties on our planning. There just isn't. So it would be, we would be far better, in my opinion, to not count on what we might sell our properties for as a use of resources to count on, because it is a very unpredictable, it's an unpredictable pathway.
Great. And seeing no other questions, I do want to thank all the work of the committee members who spent 80 plus, I'm guessing many more hours in conversations. So to all of you that are here in the room tonight and those that aren't, thank you so much on behalf the kids in our district and the board and our community for taking that time out of your lives to invest in this very important discussion. I think the board is genuinely aware of the levity for many families, personally affected. A number of us live in some of these areas where schools that we're talking about are located. We've worked here. Some of us have even gone to schools here in Cedar Rapids, and this is a very personal thing for many of us. But again, I think the board is well aware that there are some things coming up in the next few years, financially and in terms of learning, that we do need to address. So keep the communication lines open with us, please. Do ask questions as a board. You can address us again at our January 8th meeting. We will have, again, 5-minute public conversation time. We will also go into our work session, and if there are questions, things that you think that we should be discussing and pushing for more information as a board, please let us know. Our email addresses are on the district website. Our new communications director, Akwi Ninja, and her staff have done a great job of keeping that website up to date, as transparent as we can possibly keep it. But if you see things that aren't there, that they need to be out there, let us know, because again, we do want this to be a community conversation. And January 22nd, again, is a tentative date for board consideration of voting on the plan. So, all right, with that, unless there are any other comments from the board, I will remind everybody that we've got our calendars in front of us, and we'll look forward to feedback from this meeting from board members. With that, we'll be adjourned, and we will go into a closed session. Thank you very much for being here tonight.